reason I don't worry about it is because I think there's far more politicking that would have to happen to have anything tangible, and I still don't necessarily see that happening in my lifetime.
I mean, is the truth of the matter not that the powers that be, or at least the ones that have existed so far that had the ability to make deals in the past, they don't want a Palestinian state built only on these territories. So regardless of what, any other nation, quote unquote, acknowledges, until Gaza and West Bank, either separately or somehow together, are sufficient for the people, it's not what they want.
Yeah, which is what leads everybody to where I was going with the eventual, the next time you attack, you will be a nation state, and it will be a different conversation. This is kind of like that conversation that judges and police have with teenagers who are coming up on their 18th birthday, and this might be a very American-centric standard, so if you're from somewhere else, I get it. But where they start to have the conversation of, you're not going to be a juvenile the next time you come in front of somebody. Or the next time you fuck around, you're not going to be a juvenile. And the real punishment comes, right? And that come to Jesus conversation happens all over this country all the time. Because, we spank juveniles on the hand for things, and then we throw the book at them the minute they turn 18. It's kind of the same conversation of like, you're a UN-recognized set of territories, and so you've been allowed to say, well, our population is separate from the semi-legitimate regime and blah, 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 blah. The minute you get recognized sovereign statehood and nationhood, that goes out the window. And what your people do and what your government does ends up being grouped into the same thing. And if somebody inside of your population group decides to fire rockets at Israel, you're responsible for those rockets. And if it's because they feel like the borders should be changed, you're not a freedom fighter at that point, right? The freedom fighter narrative goes out the window the minute you have sovereign recognized borders and statehood. You're not a freedom fighter. You have your country, you have a border. The minute you try to push that border and take what is somebody else's, whether you feel you're entitled to it or not, you're engaging in something that's going to be very problematic for you. And so it's one of the reasons why there hasn't been a greater push historically, is the fear that you're not going to change the elements on the ground. And so cool, give a boss statehood, watch a October 7th happen again out of Gaza, and then Israel is well within its rights to bomb the entirety of the West Bank because you are now a neighboring nation who's invaded me.
Hello, Brent, are you okay? Brent, you okay?
I'm always okay.
Hello?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, Brent, you okay? Good?
Yeah, I'm always good.
So, Brent, you're saying that if you give them the states, the narrative, the argument that they said are freedom fighters goes down the window, right? So why not giving them the states? Why there's such a resistance to give them the states? Let them give
There
them the
hasn't
states.
been a resistance to giving them a state, Soren. We've offered them 17 options at statehood in the last 35
I'm
years.
talking about now.
There's not a resistance.
Like now.
Because here's the issue now, Soren, right? Until we get our hostages back, you're not getting a negotiated statehood. And no other nation would be expected to negotiate while you have over 100 of their citizens held hostage. It's not happening. Now, like I said, if a boss wanted to declare himself separate and negotiate statehood for the West Bank, Israel would have no real option. It would be screwed. But as long as a boss wants to continue to claim the Palestinian people are one set of people, he has to pay the consequences for the fact that Hamas and the Palestinian population there is still holding Israelis hostage. There will be no discussion of border adjustment, statehood, or recognition as long as those Israeli hostages are still kept. The entire world knows this, right? Which is why even nations that are making these announcements, they're making very loose leaf proclamations that when you read them, they support the concept of rolling out statehood discussions and recognition of a Palestinian state. Those discussions will take fucking years at this point, because you're going to have borders agreed on, which isn't happening. You're going to have every single citizen detained that is Israeli returned before the Israelis come to the table. So as long as those hostages are not back, there's no discussion.
So the hostage,
and there should
the hostage is to be returned back, and it takes years for that discussion to take place, so that the recognition of Palestine. So okay,
right. So that's just hurdle one of like 55 different hurdles. But one, Israel is not going to have a statehood discussion or acknowledgement of redrawing borders with a potential neighbor, because right now Israel's neighbors are the recognized nation state of Lebanon, the recognized nation state of Syria, even though it barely has control over itself, the recognized nation state of Egypt, and 2 UN territories, semi-autonomous territories of Palestine.
So Palestine is not recognized.
Is Palestine a nation state? I'm pretty sure I just fucking said for the entire room 2 UN recognized territories of ethnic Palestinians. If you had shut the fuck up and let me finish speaking, you would have heard me. This is going to be your one warning about interrupting me. This is going to be your one warning about interrupting me, right?
I've already given them a warning today, so I just moved.
Okay, well, good. So here's why that comment irritates me. I was literally in the moment saying, and 2 recognized, UN-recognized territories of ethnic Palestinians. I was in the middle of saying it when his dumbass interrupted me mid-speech, mid-comment, right? If people would listen with both their ears, right? It's the old adage, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, listen twice as much as you talk. If somebody else is speaking, listen to what they're saying. Don't be prepared to chime in with what you're saying before they're fucking done, because a lot of the time the questions you have will be answered, right? The neighbors are a number of recognized nation states, being Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and then you have 2 UN-recognized territories that do not have statehood. And what that means is the UN has a lot more influence inside of them, and Israel has to engage differently. A recognized nation of Palestine would be tied into the same responsibilities and regulations and rules of war as everybody else. Which means if you have an October 7th that comes through your border on the Gaza side, Israel's response could have included invading and carpet bombing the entire West Bank. Because you would have been one nation, and your nation invaded a neighbor, and therefore you can be bombed into fucking eternity in an act of war, and the allies of your neighbor can step in and get involved, and it's a whole different conversation, right? It becomes a war, not a conflict. Israel had to go into Gaza to pull out Hamas leadership, right? That's what Israel had to do because it was a UN-recognized territory. If it was the state of Palestine, they could have simply bombed away at their neighbor who invaded them and took their citizens. Period. They could have engaged more harshly, less consideration, no flyering, no warnings, and simply gone to war in the way that we allow people to go to war. You can't declare war on a neighbor that doesn't have sovereignty.
But Netanyahu declared a war. I think
he declared a war on the political entity that is Hamas, because that is what he's allowed to do. He couldn't declare a war on the region of Gaza because they're not a recognized nation state. He declared a war on Hamas, and he went in and did what they did, chasing down Hamas. And the population was complicit in hiding them and not turning on them and not turning them in. And so it forced Israel's hands on the methodology. And so that's why you have what you have. If it was a recognized, let's just say you had 2 states. You had the recognized nation state of Palestine in the West Bank, and you had the recognized nation state of Gaza, right? Israel could have gone to war with Gaza and simply done 10 times what it has done in this process and been well within its rights, because it would have been a war between neighboring nations that one of them started by breaching the sovereign borders. Because you're dealing with a territory and an illegitimate, semi-recognized regime being responsible for the action, Israel's hands were tied, and this becomes a humanitarian conversation, and the conversation about the population shifts, and it's a much messier dynamic, because you cannot attack a recognized territory in the same way that you can a sovereign nation state.
So 10 times more would be 10 times casualties. So we're talking about 400,000 people. Death, right?
We're talking about a war. A war. Do you know how much death comes in war? I've been to war, right? I don't know if you have, Soren. I've been to war. I've fought in a war. And I've fought in a war in the Middle East, in the area we're fucking talking about, right? War equals death. It's why most countries don't like war. It's why most countries avoid war. It's why we have peace deals and treaties and military buildup and things of those nations.
But don't you think, like, killing 400,000 people, that would create, like, escalation of anti-Semitism in the world?
Soren, here's the way nation states work. You are responsible for the actions of your nation state, right? So when Russia chose to invade its neighbor, Russia made the choice to start a war by invading the sovereign nation state of Ukraine. Russia publicly said it was justified because it was clearing out Nazis. Regardless of what I feel about that, right? Russia openly acknowledged it was violating international law because it felt like it had the moral right to, and it was breaching its neighbor. That leads to death and fight over territory, right? That's what comes with war. So if you had a recognized nation state of Palestine that had come in and done October 7th, you are breaching the sovereign nation of Israel. You are stealing its citizens. You are committing an act of war. You have declared war. War is bloody. War has death. War is less controlled. And so, yes, you would probably had 2 to 3 times, 4 times the death, which is my point. This is why we don't bestow statehood on unstable regimes that are not able to meet the minimum requirements at the UN, which is control over your population, a stable political system of some sort, the ability to feed, clothe, house, and produce the basics for your own people. These are things that have always been required for recognized statehood. And it's because you need to be able to stand on your own 2 feet to be recognized, and you need to be able to stay within your own fucking borders, because the consequence of doing otherwise is the risk of going toe-to-toe with another nation state. And the international laws that regulate that are very different than the laws that regulate what Israel has been allowed to do in a recognized territory with a semi-legitimate government, right? A legitimate nation state of Palestine with a recognized government and a recognized leadership and a recognized military branch, it would be a very different conversation, and you would have had an all-out war and assault on both sides of the Palestinian nation, and Israel would have been well within its rights under international law to carpet bomb the fuck out of both sides. Now, I'm saying this not because that's what I want, right? Because actually that's what I fear, is that if you give statehood to an entity that isn't ready to hold themselves up and isn't ready to self-police their own extremists, then you run this risk. The Taliban are a great example right now. The United States left, and they are using all of their resources to fend off Islamic extremism in their own country. They're dealing with Daesh, they're dealing with ISIS, they're dealing with several entities of growing Islamic extremism inside of their country, because guess what? They are now the legitimate regime of the nation state of Afghanistan. So they are having to fend off all of these radical groups who want to take control of their government, and they're having to stop attacks from inside of their country going into their neighbors' countries, because those are the responsibilities and obligations of a nation state. My concern is that if you rush this process while Abbas clearly does not have control, and especially if you include the Gazan region, the next time radicals pull the shit they do, you now have a nation state attacking another nation state, and Israel's hands will not be tied like they've been. My point is, the devastation we're all sad about right now is the devastation that happened to a sovereign territory, not a nation state. The UN has given them partial recognition. They are a UN-recognized territory, or set of territories, depending on how you want to look at the way it was spelled out. But either way, ethnic Palestinian territories that are pursuing statehood, right? That made it to where Israel could not do certain things and had to stem its behavior. Now, it's at the World Court because the accusation is that it didn't. But at the end of the day, the flyering, the knocking, all of those things, those would not have happened if they were a sovereign nation state. Israel would have simply said, we're at war with Palestine because they have invaded our border and taken our people. We are now going to bomb the holy hell out of them on both sides and destroy their government infrastructure and destroy their economy and destroy their things. You can do that in war. You can't do that when you're rooting out an illegitimate regime or terrorist organization in a semi-autonomous territory. This is why it's important, and that nuance is important. And it's why when people try to compare wars like Russia and Ukraine to this conflict, they're not the same, because the legal mechanisms available and the responsibility and liability is very different to both sides. When you have one nation state having to engage with a pseudo-terrorist, semi-legitimate regime of a territory, all that complication goes out the window the minute you give them statehood. The minute they are the recognized sovereign nation state of Palestine, they are responsible for every fucking missile that comes out of their country. And every fucking missile that comes out of their country and every terrorist attack on an Israeli now becomes the responsibility of the state and a potential issue for war.
And also, if there are the steps, they can take legal action as well. If they don't want to go with military-wise, they can also take legal action too.
Soren, my point is, they could, they won't. I can tell you, and this is the difference, right, is that if a sovereign nation state of Palestine was in place when October 7th had happened, and you had that happen, Israel would have gone in more aggressively, more broadly on both sides. And you would have seen widespread devastation in the West Bank because it would have been the nation of Palestine attacking them. They didn't have that. They had the terrorist organization of Hamas, kind of the illegitimate governors of Gaza. It's a much muddier water, and you can't just attack a territory because they don't have a military, they don't have a guard, they don't have a government system. Whereas once you have statehood, that changes. But Daniel's got his hand up. So
I have a
concern
question
from that, or is it
okay, Soren, did you not just hear me literally say Daniel has had his hand up? He's been trying to break in. We're going to go to Daniel.
I have a question. Lebanon is a nation state, and they have Hezbollah working from, basically what I'm trying to say, what will happen if Palestine will become a state? They will have their own legitimate government, but still Hamas will continue operating from their territory as a terror organization that is not the government, same as Hezbollah is doing from Lebanon or Syria.
So if Israel wanted to hold Lebanon responsible for Hezbollah operating inside of their border, Israel could.
Hezbollah is part of a government. Hezbollah is part of the government. They have members in parliament.
Oh, for the love of God, Soren, do you ever shut the fuck up to respect other people speaking? Did your mother not teach you that? I don't know what country you're from, so maybe in your culture, being a disrespectful fuck just passes. But I'm about done with it this morning, right? We're all having a conversation. We're making room for everybody. But if Daniel clearly asks me a question, why the fuck would Soren chime in? Just come on, be an adult here, because I'm getting real impatient. So, Daniel, right, I was going to go to the direction that Soren went of Hezbollah has a representation inside of the legitimate Lebanese government, right? The only reason Israel chooses, and the United States chooses, to engage as if Hezbollah is its own entity is because of the fear of a collapsing Lebanon, a more radical Lebanon to come afterwards, and the potential of having to go to war with Lebanon. It is far more beneficial for Israel to simply acknowledge that Hezbollah exists, that they operate outside of the decision-making of the legitimate regime, even though they are participants in it, and to simply counterattack Hezbollah. Now, if Israel wanted to, Israel could hold Lebanon accountable for it and go to war, go into Lebanon, and start a giant fucking Middle Eastern war with our neighbor to the north, who is trying very hard to not be more radical, whose Christian population is collapsing, who's on the brink of a civil war or a coup every 5 years. It's a tactical decision on Israel's part to not hold them accountable in that way. It's not that they legally can't, because they are a part of the regime there. They are an elected part of the government. Now, they're operating outside of government orders is always the declaration of Lebanon, right? The recognized government tends to say it doesn't have control over Hezbollah, and it's not approving Hezbollah's decisions. And Israel and the West kind of just accept it because nobody wants to set fire to a very unstable regime that will most likely turn into a worse situation, right? The Lebanon that sits on top of Israel today is probably going to be a far worse Lebanon if they end up in a civil war and they end up with internal conflict and strife in that regard. So it doesn't benefit Israel or the U.S. to kind of poke the bear, so they allow it to happen. They're not required to.
I mean, same as in the West Bank, you have like a government, and then you have like the Jenin terror hub that Abbas cannot control, and we are not taking over the entire West Bank or attacking it. We are just attacking the militants. So I'm trying to understand from what you said, if Palestine, like Gaza, becomes a like sovereign state or whatever, a recognized state, and are responsible for everything. Do you think that Israel will actually accept will acknowledge this, or will act the same they do now with West Bank and Lebanon, where they acknowledge that the government doesn't have power and they have to fight the militants and not the entire country?
No,
I hope it makes sense.
So, no, it makes sense. So and again, this is just my guesstimate on this, is that the minute they get statehood, it changes the entire equation for Israel, and it changes the security risks into untenable risks, right? The reason why Hezbollah is tolerated in Lebanon is because it's a better option for Israel to be able to strategically strike back at Hezbollah, not go to war with Lebanon, and not risk triggering the civil war or the destabilization in the northern border, right? It's more beneficial to just do it the way it is right now. It's not going to be more beneficial for Israel when there is a Palestinian state that arguably most of Israelis don't want, and the borders are probably not going to be 100% of what Israel wants or what the Palestinians want. So you're going to have a nation state with borders nobody's happy about, with, a semi-stable government. I don't think Israel gives the grace there that it gives in these other situations, because I don't think the same benefit exists.
But the real concern is if this becomes a state, they can legal action. If they even put down their arms, they can legal action. That's also another concern that Israel might have. You know what I mean? They don't rely on South Africa or Ireland to take the case to the courts. They can do it themselves. Don't you think so?
Well, here's the problem. Once you become a nation state, what case are they taking forward? Right? This is the whole point, Soren, right? In order for them to be a nation state, there has to be a sovereign border recognized.
Correct.
And honored.
Yeah, no
and
blockades.
honored.
No blockades.
And honored by both. Well, no, blockades are a different conversation, because militarily you can blockade somebody else. That's a whole different conversation. But what I'm saying is, though, if, let's say, just for simplicity here, let's say tomorrow Abbas said, okay, fuck Gaza, that's complicated, he's not going to do this, but let's say he did. And he said, I want the West Bank to be an autonomous, recognized nation state There's no reason we shouldn't be. We have a legitimate government. We keep our population fed. We have an economy that functions. We have good relations with our Arab neighbors. We've met all the minimum standards. All of the terrorism Israel talks about is in Gaza. All of the violence Israel talks about is in Gaza. We want to be the sovereign nation state of Palestinian West Bank, right? Israel would be hard-pressed to justify why they couldn't. And the minute that that was recognized internationally with a border, in that concept, the settlements would have to be pushed the fuck out. Because you can't just have settlements inside of a recognized nation state, right? So there would have to be some negotiated room there to remove those Israeli settlements and international guidance to say, hey, we're not recognizing that, so your population has this amount of time to move out. This is the compensation you're getting. Maybe the land border moves by a certain amount of space because you're losing this, whatever that is, right? At that point, Israel cannot expand settlements or communities into a sovereign nation state. So the settlement discussion goes away, right? Because Israel's not going to be able to legally do it. It's been a gray area because they are a territory. So this settlement argument goes out the window, right? And the minute you are a nation state with boundaries, you don't get to complain that you want more than you got in your statehood recognition, right? The border becomes the border. So at that point, the Palestinians get to guard their own border. And that's your border. It stays there, right fucking there. That is where the border is. That's where it stays. Does it matter you think you should have control of more? You get that. If you look at the conflicts that Israel has, it's over land, which would be settled before statehood, whether Israel liked it or not. Israel doesn't go into Lebanon and build settlements. Israel doesn't go into Egypt and build settlements. When Syria was sovereign, aka could protect its own territory, Israel didn't push that line because even Israel acknowledges sovereign borders. So all of this bullshit that is contested would go out the window. Here's the problem, right? As Kelly said, the Palestinian population would have to accept that border and understand you're never coming back into Haifa. You're not welcome. You're never coming back into Jaffa. You're not welcome. You're never coming into Tel Aviv. You're never coming into those places. And as a neighbor, Israel can choose to close the border. You're not welcome in our country. You can't come through Israel. You can't use our airport. You can't be on our electric grid. We don't want a relationship with our neighbor. It could say, hey, we don't want a relationship with you at all. We don't want to trade with you. We don't want to give you food. We don't want to sell you anything. We're going to close our border, seal it up, strap that as a military heavy border, and call it a fucking day. And they can.
And they can have their own airport.
They get to stay where you are.
They can have their own airport.
And they get to have their own airport. And they get to have their own hospitals, and they get to have their own military inside of their border. Most of the fucking conflicts have come out of the misuse of these things. Gaza had an airport. Gaza has had 2 airports and an airstrip in my lifetime, all of which were used to launch missiles and engage in terrorist attacks on Israel, and all of which were decimated because of that, right? If you are a nation state, build your airport. But when you launch rockets out of it at Israel, now you're at war, right? All of these things that resulted in the responding attacks would have to stop, which is why if you give someone statehood and you draw those borders, you better be damn sure they're willing to honor those borders and that they can take care of themselves. Because Israel's going to seal that border the fuck up, and they don't have to let them in. The only reason why there's an argument that they have to let the Gazans in right now is because they're blockaded. Israel has an exit, Egypt has an exit, and both have had them blockaded for decades. Once you're a sovereign nation state, build your airstrip and fly out. You don't have to drive through my country. We don't have to let you into our country. We don't have to let you in for our airports. We don't have to let you have access to our electric grid. We don't have to let you have access to our water. You're a sovereign nation state. Figure it out yourself. Get off our grid. Get off our water. No, you cannot come through our roads. We're sealing our border. You're not welcome. So with that, you better be ready to to do what you need to do so that your population can fly and your airports are not used for terrorism. These are all steps of that development that is why countries have not supported the statehood, because they understand you need to be in a position to prop yourself up, because the minute they are a recognized nation state, Israel can lock down the border and say, not one of you is ever welcome in this country again. You will not come through our borders. You will not come through our airports. You're not welcome here.
Brent, can I ask you another legal perspective? Tomorrow the ICJ will make a decision. One of the options that is probable is that they will have a warrant to stop the war. I would assume that if such a warrant is issued, Israel will not comply, which will turn the war to an illegal war unless the U.S. will veto it. Even if the UN veto it, the ICJ decision still holds, and other countries might take it into consideration with answers and whatnot. Can you share your opinion about what will happen if the ICJ will decide tomorrow to call for the stopping of the war, which is probable, I think, but you have a different opinion.
So, again, just an opinion here, and I'll lay out some logistics. So the ICJ and the ICC are the court branches of the UN, right? When it comes to this particular court, they have no enforcement power. They get to hear things that are brought to them by member states or states withstanding. In this case, the initial case was brought by South Africa, right? You now have other nations joining, secondary conversation. They looked at it, they said, hey, this is what we think, this is what our current ruling is, and we will move forward with a lengthy investigation because that's how these things work. And there have been little things brought to their attention along the way. If they decide to issue a order or a decision, you can use either word depending on the vernacular, that says, hey, this war has to stop. They have no enforcement power. That decision is given to South Africa, that decision is given to Israel, and that decision is referred back to the UN, where it is passed to the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council is where enforcement and acknowledgement begins. If the US or the UK choose to go, no, we're vetoing this, it doesn't erase it. It simply means that the UN Security Council has deemed the UN will not be intervening. The UN will not be honoring this. The UN will not be moving forward. It doesn't go away. It sits there as the referred decision of the court. But there's no movement from the UN that can happen outside of the approval of the UN Security Council first. So if the US blocks it, you now have the UN stalemated and locked to where they won't be moving forward with anything. Now, individual nations can say, hey, we recognize this court order, and we think that it should be enforced. Okay, that's wonderful. I think Chris Hemsworth should have to have sex with me because he's an attractive man. I have no power of enforcement, and they'll essentially have that same power of enforcement. Now, they can use that. They can use that to say, hey, you know, we're going to stop trade, we're going to do this. There won't be any UN-based sanctions because you need the Security Council to move forward on that. There won't be any UN-based joint military action because you need the Security Council on board with that. It essentially leaves their decision publicly available, and this is what the court thinks. But it has no enforcement. So we'll be right back where we are if it's vetoed, where other nations get to decide what they're doing, right? Turkey just announced they're stopping $9 billion in trade relation with Israel. Egypt is weighing over certain trade cancellations. Frankly, Israel doesn't really give a fuck, which is kind of comical in its own way. And these particular nations are probably going to hurt themselves more than Israel by doing this, given what they buy and what they utilize. You know, in Jordan's case, being food. You know, go ahead and supplement where you're getting your food, but that's fine. So yeah, these court decisions, if the Security Council UN warrant for his arrest. South Africa said they won't. India disinvited him. Pakistan said they won't. All of these nations have said, yeah, we don't care there's a warrant. We're not going to enforce it anyways. Because there's no enforcement power other than saying, hey, you're obligated to. You know, if Putin got on a plane and went to Cape Town, they're technically obligated to arrest him and transfer him to The Hague. That's not happening. They've been very clear they have no intention. If the warrants go through, if the warrants go through on Netanyahu, he's not going to fly to D.C. and have the U.S. detain him and send him to The Hague. They're going to refuse to abide by the warrant. And they're going to call it illegitimate, which is what all of the allies of Russia are doing about that warrant, because UN enforcement is toothless. They can't do anything outside of the Security Council. And we have a Security Council that's willing to veto left and right. Russia does it, China does it, the US does it, the UK does it. So these things don't really matter because you can't enforce them.
How confident are you the US won veto this time, given the fact that election is around the corner?
So I don't see a possibility for the U.S. to not veto it, and this is why. For U.S. interest, there's a balancing act being done here, right? And they're going to lean into, until this order, because this is why I say this, every ceasefire deal the U.S. said no to lacked the immediate release or contingent release of hostages. Every ceasefire deal the U.S. proposed made any sort of peace or any sort of de-escalation contingent on hostage release. So it's reasonable to make the presumption that the U.S. is going to stick to that stance because it's been their stance all along, that you cannot ask Israel to stop this military action until you return all of its citizens. So my guess, that is the stance they use to veto this and say, no, we do not think it's reasonable to demand Israel cease this military action when the main purpose was for them to go in, remove Hamas, and get their people back. Hamas is not fully removed, and they don't have their people back. If you want them out, give them their people back, which has been the U.S.'s stance all along. And that any sort of deal that didn't make the release of all hostages contingent was an invalid deal. So I'm going to guess they'll veto it because there's no part of the court decision that demands the hostages be released. And there's no way Israel stops this incursion until all of her people are returned.
So if the hostages are released a day before the Security Council meeting, provided the ICJ go ahead with that decision, you think that the U.S. may not go use its veto power?
If the hostages were released, I think it would be unfortunate. It would be unfortunate for the Israeli stance because the U.S. would have a much harder time justifying why it would be vetoing it, because the whole point has been this war started because they came in on October 7th, slaughtered, raped, tortured, kidnapped, murdered, and have held hostage. So Israel then went in to root out the illegitimate terrorist government and get its people back. If you get your people back, right, and if tomorrow they handed everybody back that's still alive, which again, we don't even know what that number is because that number keeps changing. But if they said, hey, all of your people are at the Egyptian border, they'll be there at 8 a.m., blah, 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 right? And all of those people were back. Israel would be hard-pressed to justify continued action, even to root out Hamas, because they would have gotten their people back. And so if that happened, then you'd have an opportunity. The problem is that that's never going to happen, because Hamas understands the minute they give the people back, they have no clout to make demands. So yes, Israel will pull out, but you're not going to get any of the concessions you had hoped for, and Israel's still likely going to continue to hunt for your fucking terrorist leadership abroad and there, as Israel is known to do. People that are on those lists for the attacks, they're still going to have arrest warrants for them, and they're still going to keep an eye out. But It's unlikely they hand them back because they're hoping for concessions. They've been hoping for concessions all along. Once the people come back, the only concession you get is Israel leaves. And you're no better off than you were before. So if these people think they're freedom fighters and that's why they did it, yeah, you're better off in terms of international support right now. But your entire area has been devastated structurally and infrastructure-wise, and Israel's not going to sign on to any sort of deal it's pressured into. So the one thing that would force Israel's hand to stop is the one thing they're never going to do. If they release those hostages, Netanyahu's hand would be fucking wrenched behind his back, and he'd be forced to stop. Because even the population of Israelis don't really like that this is a necessary war. And if they got all the people back, and you said you've wiped out most of the Hamas infrastructure, the majority of the Israeli population is going to want this war to end. They already do. And so, you know, if they were to release the hostages, it would probably end tomorrow. But given I don't foresee that happening, Israel's not stopping short of getting its people back.
Bryn, in terms of the hostages, and I know that the realities of the numbers and the circumstances these people are in are largely unknown, but hypothetically, if, let's say Hamas only knows where a handful of people are, and there are 70 other hostages, I don't know, you know, in my hypothetical, if we would have proof of life or whatever, but they were taken by just Gazans, not necessarily Hamas, and exist within that population somewhere hidden. What rights do the IDF or the Israeli government have that are like separate from how they can respond to specifically Hamas? Like, how does that change their calculation of what they can do to get their people back?
So if there was a legitimate and recognized government in place that could assert sovereignty and control, they would be under some sort of international obligation from a number of things to seek that assistance, right? So if you and I go on holiday and we're in Mexico and a cartel kidnaps us, right? The United States and Israel cannot just immediately send in SEAL Team 6 and fucking members of the Israeli equivalent to come get us. They have to contact the State Department. They have to talk to the legitimate Mexican government. They're going to talk to the local authorities, and they have to be given the opportunity to resolve the problem themselves. Now, upon that problem not being resolved, there eventually becomes a reasonable or unreasonable assertion that, hey, you're not getting our people back, we're going to come do it ourselves. And then that becomes an argument between the Mexican government and the U.S. government on breaching their territory. Here's the difference. There is no government in Gaza. Hamas is not a recognized power structure there right now. They're not currently in control of the security. They're not currently in control of the feeding. They're not currently in control of anybody. There's no structure in place. There's no law enforcement in place. So Israel isn't really beholden to ask anybody else to do it for them. They're already there. They are in control of security at this point. They are the quote-unquote occupying military authority on the ground. They are the only recognized policing entity that's there because Hamas is hiding, right? So they could continue to go digging for their people, whether or not they're just held by generic Gazans or they're held by Hamas. It's, we're here and we're looking for our people. There isn't a government here to do it. And there isn't a recognized government here to contest us being here. It's kind of a weird gray area because Abbas doesn't have legal claim to Gaza, so he can't contest them being there. Hamas leadership would have to come out of the tunnels to openly contest them being there. And the members who are in Qatar and living abroad are part of the political class. They don't control the military arm. And so they don't control the authority on the ground. So it's kind of like Israel doesn't have anybody to ask permission. And so it can essentially continue to do it itself because there's nobody recognized to say, hey, get out of my house. You don't have an authority. Now, if Hamas wants to come out of the tunnels and stop hiding, and they would like to come out and say, hi, I'm the leader of Hamas on the ground, get out, they could do that. And then Israel would have to address that request from the quote-unquote legitimate regime. But since there's nobody doing that, there's nobody home. There's nobody in charge here. I guess we're in charge here. It's essentially how that works.
Bran, I have a question. If you've already covered it, I haven't been in the room, so just tell me if you have. But I've been reading stuff lately talking about Egypt, insinuating that Egypt has been actually undermining the ceasefire efforts, and they've got all sorts of, so much access of the tunnels between Egypt and Gaza, and that for them it's a money-making thing. I mean, it was all very nefarious, and I just wondered what you knew about that or didn't know about.
So I'm going to say I am looking at those claims skeptically, and here's why. So Egypt has spent the better part of the last 2 decades flushing out the Muslim Brotherhood, right, and getting rid of their own radical extremism. And Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's a sister association, essentially, or organization. And so it's one of the reasons why Egypt doesn't want the Gazan population to come south over their border. They've been pushing out that brand of Islamic extremism for 2 decades. This government of Egypt is trying very hard to not have that type of influence in their own country. They have had terror tunnels. They flood them with seawater, right? Israel tends to evacuate the tunnels first. Egypt simply pumps seawater into the tunnels until they collapse. And they have done this with every terror tunnel they find for 2 decades. I find it very hard to believe that the regime that has been fighting the very people who make up Hamas and the organizations they're allied with, and has been flooding the tunnels and killing off these people and executing them when they catch them, I find it hard to buy that all of a sudden they're in support of these people, and all of a sudden they're being helpful when they have blockaded them longer than Israel has. They have flooded their tunnels and they've executed them. So it's hard for me to buy into this thought that they somehow did a full 360 and went, no, let's help these people. We're going to let them come through these tunnels, when for 2 decades they kill them on sight, they flood the tunnels. They're more aggressive with them than Israel is, because they don't want that population in their country, and they don't want the illicit activity in their country. So I find it very hard to believe this Egyptian regime is willfully allowing that, not to mention choosing to prop it up.
Right. Well, that was my reaction to it as well, but I appreciate you elaborating on why.
Yeah, and they've spent years collapsing these tunnels. The tunnels out of Egypt, frankly, they have a harder time than Israel does with them because of the way that border is, because of the crossing, because of the sand, because of the deep desert to the right. They have put a ton of resources into collapsing these tunnels and interfering with them for years, that it's just not very likely they'd suddenly be like, okay, come on in. It would be like you telling me that the United States suddenly built walkways for the cartels to have their drug mules come through after we've spent billions of dollars trying to stop the cartels. All of a sudden, oh, did you see those cute little park walkways where all the drug mules can walk in with all the cocaine and the guns? I'd be like, yeah, not really buying that when you've spent billions of dollars and decades avoiding it. I don't really think Egypt's getting on board, because the whole reason they're concerned, they're not, let's be real, Egypt has not done much to help the Palestinians ever. They blockade their border, they blockade the ocean, they do the exact same thing Israel's done, and they've done it longer than Israel has. They're just Arabs, so they get a free pass. on doing it, right? They're not bigots, they're not this, they're just doing it for national security concerns, but Israel isn't. The reason why they're terrified of Israel trying to move those 2 million people into their desert is because they don't want to absorb them. They don't want 2 million radical, indoctrinated children Gazans who have been indoctrinated and raised under Hamas to come into their country when they've been doing their damnedest to flush out the Islamic Brotherhood for 20 years. It's like, wait, so we've put all this effort to get rid of people just like you. Now you want to put 2 million of them here? That's why Egypt's fighting Israel moving them. It's not that they give a fuck that they're being moved. It's that they're like, fuck no, you keep them on that side of the fence.
Well, Israel, once they now took control of the Rafah crossing, they found a few shafts that are leading into Egypt that were used for smuggling. I don't know why Egypt didn't close them until now. The flooding doesn't work anymore because Hamas kind of built barricades with inside, so they can kind of have like blast doors that can stop the water from coming. But we did find a lot of smuggling. Maybe this is why people were really afraid of us going into Rafah. But yeah, you 100% about the fear of Egypt regarding the Muslim Brotherhood and their effect on their country. But they just don't get any bad PR for it, as you said, because they're Arabs and no one cares about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the hypocritical part, because people will point out, okay, well, you close your border crossing to them, well, so does Egypt. Oh, you have them blockaded. Okay, well, Egypt's had them blockaded for 20 years longer. Like, Egypt has had the same mechanisms in place, but because they're Arab, they get a pass on it. But, yeah, do I think, and this is where I want to draw a distinction here, Daniel, right? Do I think the regime of Egypt was permitting those smuggle tunnels? Not at all. Do I think Egypt has the same corruption problems that nations like Mexico and Guatemala and other countries have, to where you probably had leadership on the ground at the border benefiting from it, right? And even in America, when we have people who come smuggling through, every few years they catch somebody who's either a sheriff in Texas or works for a border patrol agency who gets caught helping them smuggle shit in. So I'm going to say, on an institutional level, Egypt has put in an extreme amount of energy and money to stop these things from happening. Do I believe there's corruption and people were doing smuggle tunnels? Oh, 100%. But there's a different conversation between whether the Egyptian government supports it or there's just enough corruption on the ground that it happens.
Oh, 100% there's corruption. I mean, we know that 80,000 Gazans went into Egypt and they each had to pay $6,000. That is bribe. And that is almost $500 million that went into Hamas and I guess some pockets in Egypt. I agree with you. I don't think it's the Egyptian government, but I do think that they kind of put a blind eye. They monitor it, I guess. They say they can handle it, but so much money is going through those smugglings. I guess they know. They just don't want to fight it, maybe.
This is not meant to take us off topic, but just to comment on the corruption, like when Bryn mentions sheriffs by the border, things like that. This is like oftentimes when you have people who facilitate these criminal activities, it's not necessarily that they themselves were criminals or had criminal intent and were, recruited because of that and participated because of that. It's just as easy that these people have some sort of like fucked up thing in their past, or they got caught doing something. Basically, they were compromised by their own behavior, possibly even set up to be compromised. This is why, like, when people complain about respectability politics, and they say, like, who cares who cheated on their wife, that doesn't really have an impact on leadership. And sure, maybe an affair doesn't, whatever. But, and maybe, maybe at a federal level, these things get fleshed out early. But this is ultimately why people want to feel a sense of, like moral responsibility with candidates, or at least in the past it was. And maybe because we don't see the same kinds of corruption that other places do, we tend to just dismiss why it's important to feel like, you can see some kind of character or moral value in candidates. This is one of the ways in which, when you forget that, like, this stuff will happen more and more.
Yeah, I mean, also,
again, I'm not trying to take us off track, but
also corruption is important, because let's not forget, some people argue the reason that this conflict is prolonged is maybe it's because some people in Israel trying to escape the corruption cases. Before 7th of October, there was a corruption case against Netanyahu, and that's also a valid point.
Yeah, that's not at all why this is happening.
Yeah.
So let me be very clear for people on that. Israeli cases don't vanish, right? So this may have bought time where that case has not moved forward. It didn't go anywhere. It's not gone. He didn't get a medal and suddenly he's great. In the same way that before October 7th, there were massive protests over this current government's judicial reform proposals. Those haven't gone anywhere. The population is still not on board with it. Netanyahu is very likely going to get tossed on his ass. One of the reasons why you have Benny Gantz stepping forward and saying, hey, can we get an end of time plan here? Can we get these things? Is because he understands Netanyahu's day is done. And for people who don't know Israeli politics, Netanyahu was supposed to step down. Benny Gantz was going to take the place. Netanyahu decided he wasn't going to do that and ran again. And Benny Gantz took half of Likud and opened blue and white. And we had a series of elections in Israel that were tight elections because this bulk party split in half. And the big divider was, hey, Netanyahu needs to go. We want Gantz. That was the plan. Go away, retire, get out. And Netanyahu didn't leave, and it split it in half, right? So the reality of the situation is, when this all ends, Netanyahu's governing body right now is still going to be very vulnerable. He is still very likely going to be tossed out in whatever next election gets called. It's very likely we get Gantz. Nobody's really shocked by that, because most likely all of the Netanyahu voters line up right behind him, because up until the contentious elections, they're almost identical in political stance. And so you're not, there's this concept that the war lasting is super beneficial to people, and it really isn't. It's fucking up careers. It's making it worse for people like Netanyahu. Like, yes, right now he's kind of stalling, but I'm going to be honest, I think that has more to do with him understanding, if we don't get those hostages back, and that is the end of his, electoral career, that's what he's going down in the history book for, and probably doesn't want that. But the concept that keeping this going is keeping him out of court or keeping him out of jail or keeping him in office, that's not the case. He knows he's on his way out as these things happen.
And Brent, the trial goes on. I mean, right now, we've had 2 days ago, they're still giving testimonies. It didn't stop for 1 second. It didn't affect the trial at all. Regardless of the war, regardless if Bibi will stay prime minister or not, the trial will move forward. The war will not stop the trial. And I can give you, 2 days ago, Yariv Levin, the Ministry of Justice, had to testify on court for this trial. So, Soren, I don't know if it helps you or not, but the trial didn't stop for 1 second. So you can forget about this narrative that Bibi had anything to do with it, because it didn't affect the trial at all.
Yeah, the only thing that took any sort of a slowdown, and I should have clarified this, is the judicial reform process, because it took a backseat politically to other things, right? But it still isn't gone, and you still have the vast majority of the population doesn't support it. And for people who aren't Israeli or don't understand, basically over the last 10, 15 years, you have a high court that has kind of expanded its power. And there was in my opinion, reasonable push initially by Netanyahu and others to rebalance between the judiciary and the legislative, right? And rebalance out the parliamentary process and get the court back in its box. Like, you get back in your wheelhouse, quit expanding, and we'll be over here. What that turned into with Ben-Gvir and, Smotrich and the lovely folks that are part of the governing coalition is them pushing further. And essentially what people are afraid of is the push they have been making would disempower the courts and would give them more power to basically ignore the courts. And it's like, okay, so this was originally a conversation about getting the court to step back into the power it's supposed to have. And now you've gone a step further and you're trying to take away some of the court's power. So it's a big deal in Israel. The population has not forgotten this. It didn't just go away. There are still protests about this, and large protests. It just is getting less media attention, as is the trial, than the hostages in the war, which is obvious. Like, in terms of what's going to catch the most media attention, the death toll, the humanitarian crisis story, the hostages, that plays a lot better than the bureaucratic pieces, the criminal trial on corruption, which frankly are pretty boring charges when you compare them to how other countries operate. It's kind of boring, but it's not stopped. So the narrative that, like, Netanyahu has gotten a reprieve from any of these things, he hasn't. Anyway, it's time for me to give the dog a bath, so I will see you lovely folks a little later. I'll be listening for now.
Bran, I hope you will be here tomorrow after the ICJ ruling, because I think it will be very interesting to discuss what they say and what they rule. So I hope we can catch tomorrow, because I think it will be interesting tomorrow.
I'll be in at some point, I'm sure.
Have a great day. Thank you for your input. It was interesting.
Thank you, Bren. Anybody that, you guys, whatever you want to talk about, if anyone wants to share anything, just go popcorn. I am cooking and mostly listening.
I'm looking forward for tomorrow to see what that brings into the entire propaganda war, but that balloon will explode only tomorrow. I'm just preparing in advance.
Do you know, like, is there a time? Like, is there a decision time, or do they just? Just any time.
No, there will be a live broadcast. I will try and find when it is. Maybe we can actually have a room at the same time to kind of follow it and maybe broadcast it. Let me see if I can find when it is. Or if anyone knows and can spare me the search, let us know.
I think what ICJ is after is just to put a halt on this war, not to complete the end of it, just to put a halt on it.
Yeah, well, it could either be to stop the operation in Rafah or to put a halt to the operation itself. My personal view is that in either case, Israel would not comply with this. And then I want to understand what the repercussions of that, because Israel would not stop that, no matter what. This I'm 99% of, sure.
Which is not surprising.
Yeah, of course it's not surprising, because it's a just war, and this is a sham court, so obviously we will ignore it. I'm just trying to understand what is the repercussion for, like, propaganda-wise, what it means,
There's a lot
if
of
anything.
repercussions. The repercussions are that the people on the arrest warrant, like Netanyahu, can't go to countries that are a part of it. So if you
No, you're talking about
German.
You're talking about the ICC. I'm talking about the ICJ.
Oh, they're not too.
Tomorrow is the okay. The ICJ. This is, I think, the fourth time that South Africa has asked the ICJ to stop the war. We now have a new tribunal, or a new set of judges. They had elections. We now have a Lebanese head of judges, so a few judges are different than what we had until now. This is why I think that this time there is a chance that they will issue a warrant to stop the war. And then what I assume would happen, that the U.S. will veto it, especially now that they are more pleased with the operation in Rafah, I would say. But in any case, if a warrant will be issued, even if the U.S. will veto it, some countries may take it and say, okay, we accept it, and then maybe they will not sell arms to Israel or weapons or whatever. And I know that I don't see a possibility where Israel complies with a request to stop the war. I don't see that as a possibility, to be honest.
But given the fact that recently some IDF soldiers have been killed in north of Gaza, it seems that Hamas is already regrouped, even north of Gaza. So this concept of the total annihilation of Hamas in Rafah, it's a bit hard to believe. I mean, they're already there everywhere.
Well, many Hamas militants have died, were killed, but Hamas is also recruiting new people as we speak. They are recruiting people as young as 14 years old and up, and they add more soldiers to their ranks. So even though they started with 40,000 and we killed, let's say, 15,000 or I don't know how many, they are, as you said, I don't know, regrouping or recruiting new people. So the war will continue. We don't need to eliminate every last Hamas person. You know, we just need to remove them from power. We don't need to go after every little minor Hamas militant. Mostly the senior ones, and until they kind of give up ruling on Gaza. But yeah, you are right. They are recruiting more people. And I think the problem the people that are pro-Palestine should be concerned about is recruiting kids. I mean, we are calling anyone that is under 18 a child, right? I mean, this is the narrative that has been set from the beginning of the war, that anyone that is a minor under 18 is considered a child. So now they are recruiting children
I think
to fight this war.
I think it's very easy to recruit them given the fact that parents are already been killed in bombardment.
Maybe. You know, I don't subscribe to this concept because, you know, there are many Israelis that lost people for terror attacks. There are many Israelis that lost parents or grandparents to Nazis. None of them went and attacked Germans or Arabs. So this formula that if someone lost their parents in war, they have to become a terrorist, I don't think it's necessarily true. You can also say, hey, I lost my parents because of this awful war. Maybe I will change and I will not continue this war. But you may be right. They might choose to continue fighting and dying for the same reason. That is a possibility, that they will sacrifice themselves. I don't deny it. It could be happening, but they will also be dead at the end. And that is a sad situation. But that is like a never-ending cycle. I do hope that they will take 7th of October as a lesson that this thing is not worth it. Every time they use armed struggle, they either lose many people, they lose land, and they have a worse quality of life, more checkpoints, more borders. If they will not get it, then yes, we will have another cycle. I do hope that they will get it and strive for peace.
Yeah, but those,
if you are right, Soren.
Yeah, those people you were talking about, they have something to live for. But these people, they got nothing to live for. No house, no parents. They've got everything to die for, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, they're in an asymmetric situation. Yeah, it's a problem.
I do know, and if they decide to do this, then they will sacrifice themselves over and over. That is a sad reality, and I do hope that they will say, okay, we had enough of death and destruction. We want to build a nation, and we want to live in peace, and we want to have jobs, and we want to have health care, we want to have infrastructure. If they want this, then they will stop sacrificing themselves. But if you are right, Soren, and you might be right on this case, and they will choose to continue this cycle of violence, then we already know from the last 8 decades how it will end for them. So I do hope that people like you will not encourage them to do this and don't create this narrative that you automatically need to vengeance your parents. Like, if you want to vengeance your parents' death, maybe you should target your vengeance towards the people who caused it, which is Hamas, and not the people that are seeking peace, which is Israel. So I do hope that the narrative that you're telling here, Soren, is not what they believe, but if you are right, then yes, we will have another cycle, and more Palestinians will die. But I do hope that they will change their mind and will ask for peace. Because once Palestinians will call for peace and coexistence, this is what they will get. And if they will ask for war, this is what they will get. The question is, what do they want? Do they want to live in dignity and peace with jobs and healthcare and a government that takes care of them? Or do they want to continue with this violent resistance?
I mean, this is what self-determination means.
What do you mean, Kelly? I'm not sure that I got.
Well, self-determination, like as a people, the decisions that they make. I mean, I'm basically reinforcing what you said. The decisions that they make are going to determine the result. I hear so often the right wing of Israel being condemned and being blamed for the reason there hasn't been a peace agreement, and from the same people I hear this thing about they're recruiting more terrorists because their parents are dead. I mean, there's a whole lot of problems with this narrative, because evidently I heard all the kids were dead, not all the parents, but whatever. Regardless, why do you think there are more and more people that are moving to the right? If in fact you think that there are consequences to what's happening right now, you have to understand that those consequences are on both sides of the conflict. Palestinians are not uniquely disposed to process things in their own way. Everybody does. These are human beings. So you can't condemn people for responding to the environment that they exist within unless you're willing to acknowledge that it's going to be on both sides. But you also, alongside that condemnation, if you're going to condemn it all, you're implicitly you're acknowledging the fact that people do have the ability to choose a path. So I don't know. It just seems like people think that somehow Palestinians aren't going to be able to choose a different path. And it also flies in the face of the argument that there's a separation between Hamas and Palestinian people. If you're saying that the Palestinian people are going to respond uniquely, violently to these kinds of things, then you can't really make that claim anymore. And I think that claim is a fair one and should be made. I imagine there are a lot of people that don't like living in the circumstances that Hamas had people living in. So, I don't know, people just need to be logically...
I don't think that many pro-Palestinians really know what Hamas is. They see Hamas as resisting Israel, so they support them. But they don't know how Hamas is treating Palestinians. This is why I have a really hard problem with accepting that people that are pro-Hamas are also pro-Palestinians. You need to choose. Either you're pro-Palestinian or you're pro-Hamas. It doesn't work together, and I can give you plenty of evidence of how Hamas is brutally oppressing Palestinians, and I'm saying brutally, by force, by killing, by threatening. This is what the Palestinians in Gaza are living under, and me, as an Israeli, what I wish for the Palestinian people is to live in dignity, in peace, to be able to go to job, to have good health, to have good infrastructure, to go on vacation. This is what I wish for the Palestinian people. And I wish that they would have a government that would actually care for them. The pro-Palestinian people are using the Palestinians because they hate Israel, so they don't care how many Palestinians will be sacrificed for this ideology. But me, as an Israeli, I hope that they will choose peace, because I believe that once they will choose peace, they will have everything that they want to. And 20 years from now, they could even have a state. But once they will change their focus from destroying a country to creating a country, that will be the moment that we will start seeing a change.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I also think it's really important. That's one of the reasons it's important to get Hamas out of Gaza, because, Gaza being a shithole is on purpose. And the narrative behind how that happened is constructed for a reason. So if everything that you were told was reinforced by the environment you're living in, even if everything you were told was a lie, of course these people are going to feel.
You muted yourself before you finished the sentence, Kelly.
Oh, I said, of course these people are going to feel a certain way if, as Hamas destroys the infrastructure and destroys their access to everything, food, water, healthcare, and then they tell the citizens that, this is simply because Israel hates you. I mean, of course they're going to feel a certain way. That's my point. Like, Hamas is devastating these people to use them as weapons. It's terrible.
Like, we don't hear from the Palestinian people. We hear a lot of people that call themselves Palestinian because they were born to Palestinian people in the United States. We don't hear from the people of Gaza. And I want to believe that the people of Gaza know who brought this death and destruction upon them. And I do believe that many of them know that it was Hamas. We just don't hear that because they cannot say that. Living under Hamas, you don't have freedom of speech and freedom of protest and all that. So they cannot say what they think. They cannot stand up against Hamas. They need you, pro-Palestinians, to stand up against Hamas and be pro-Palestinian, be pro the people, not their government. And I'm here on 7 months on Clubhouse since the war started. I came back, and I spoke to many so-called pro-Palestinians. They are not really pro-Palestinians. That is really sad. They are pro-Hamas. They're just anti-Israel. And I think that many people think that you can either be pro-Palestine or pro-Israel, which is false. I am pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian. I'm just against Hamas. And I think removing Hamas will be good both for the Israelis and the Palestinians. And if you would like, I will put a thread in the chat, I will find it, with many evidence, forget about Israel, of how Hamas is abusing their own population. So much that there's a fatwa, which is an Islamic court ruling, let's say, against Hamas for the crime of brutally abusing Palestinians. This is not pro-Israel, this is an Islamic religion institution that is against Hamas. They are not pro-Israel, they are just pro-Palestinian, but truly pro-Palestinian. And many people here, I think Soren included, don't really care for the Palestinians. They are willing to sacrifice them for their ideology. And that is really sad. Mas, I see you right on the chat a lot. Maybe you want to come on the stage and speak your mind. Jazbi. We have to have a conversation. If it's
Baruch Hashem.
Hey, Mav.
Baruch Hashem, and Bismillah to everyone who believes, and hello to all that are listening. Yeah, I just wanted to, I listen to Bren a lot, and I've been listening to your rooms, and I was on the Massa room. There was a 24-hour room. Massa Amini was killed a couple of years ago in Iran, and that room went on for a year almost. I look at it from a perspective of faith. A faith, I'm fourth generation of faith, that second largest religion in South Carolina, a faith that's in Madagascar and Berlin and Spain. Every piece of land on earth has this faith. Our faith, interestingly enough, saved 2 years before World War I. Our faith knew the wars would come. The prophecies are clear. That's why I keep telling everyone, just read the Baha'i faith, just the prophecies. Every single word is detailed. Jewish will flee Europe. Israel will become a state. The atom will be created. This is 1863 to 1893. This Persian prophet, who rests in Haifa, who the Israelis know it as the second largest tourist site, is my religion. My religion, our religion, is a small faith, but the message is clear. Peace, not war. And the prophecy is clear. That the atom bomb will come, he says. Japan feels its carnage first. How does he know that in 1873? So my warning to both sides is you're really one side. You cannot allow politics to take out your logic and your heart. This 2.2 million Palestinians exist, and for the wealth of the Arab nations to not be able to assist, not just now, but this is an old wound. This is not a new wound. This is just a wound who had been bandaged and kicked down the road like the American debt. Just leave it for the next generation to deal with. I look for solutions. I look at God's will. I look at this small land called Israel, always winning these wars against all odds, and now it has all the power. This was foretold. So, do Palestinians deserve this? The normal Palestinians, I say, are against this because there's no elections. When you're popular, you hold elections all the time. When you close it up, when you close everything down, that's when you know you're a brutal dictator.
You are right.
I look at, and I'll just close with this. It is a big thing going on. It is a dangerous thing going on. It is not a minor thing that nuclear powers, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, is not a nuclear power, but they're involved. Iran is trying to obtain it. We should always lead with compassion and dialogue. I strongly suggest returning to the restart of the Oslo Accords. I say, why should one assassin end that peace that was signed by Clinton and Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin? Why should that deal stop because of an assassin? Why?
Arafat didn't sign it.
Thank you.
Arafat didn't sign it, Maz. That's the problem. Arafat didn't agree to this deal. And you also wrote that they had election 18 years ago and that not the majority support Hamas, which you might be right. We don't really know. The only thing that we do know is that there was a survey done after 7th of October where the vast majority of Gazans support 7th of October. And I will apply critical thinking, and I would say that there's a possibility, A, that people in Gaza are not free to speak their mind, even when they're doing a survey. And B, on their behalf, I would say that maybe the people in Gaza don't really know what happened on 7th of October, and they were told a different narrative, and this is why they support it. So I do give the poll numbers, which I think is like 78% that support the 7th of October, but I do put an asterisk to how we should, that it's not necessarily the truth and that there are some things that we need to take into consideration, which was what I said, that they live under a threat and that they don't have necessarily access to information as we have in the West. But from what we know, they have a lot of support. But again, I'm kind of contradicting myself because they do have support, but they're not really a free people. So we need to take this also with a grain of salt.
Daniel, I saw the leader of Hamas at the funeral in Tehran. Now, I haven't been back to Tehran in 45 years. None of my family has been back. So when we see him, and we know that they were with Saddam Hussein, when Saddam Hussein invaded our country, Iran, they were with Saddam. Israel supported, was one of the 4 countries. I know soldiers in that war for 8 years. There was 4 countries. You can research it yourself. Israel's open about it. Israel was the one that saved Iran from being conquered by Saddam. Only 4 countries. So our history is brotherhood. My problem is the city that I was born in is funding Hamas. That's my major issue. And I don't know why my people aren't taking this more. I don't know. I mean, when they come out in Iran, they get machine gunned. And when President Obama was sending money, it was the same thing. An Iranian hangs every 8 hours, ladies and gentlemen.
2 amazing guys about communism in the United States who travel out in Jeffrey Nichols. And that was before the release of these files. Although I'm in touch with Michael Schellenberger, I really had no idea that he would publish that today. Or not even that he could publish this article. I didn't know about it. But for me, it seems like in the United States, we see things that smells shit, looks like shit, but nobody wants to call it shit. And this is the first point. Second point is cui bono. Okay, the cui bono is always a good way to address this topic because Jared said the CIA is going against all Americans. I don't see CIA going after Hunter Biden. I don't see them going after Black Lives Matter. I don't see them going after, you can name all the groups, or destabilizing the United States and burning flags on the street, U.S. flags. So what I see clearly, based on what I've heard yesterday and for the last 15 years, because everything that Jeffrey Nichols and Travel Alden said yesterday, I've learned from Olavo. In a Brazilian perspective, what I see is just a communist activity. This is why I say it smells shit, looks like shit, but nobody says it's shit. So it's a communist activity inside the U.S. intelligence. And we have a lot of books that proves how the communists infiltrated the United States agencies. The first book I've read about this was Witness by Whittaker Chambers, who was hired to infiltrate the United States back in 1920 something. I think it was 1924, 1926. I need to check it out. And if I was a communist and I needed to destroy the United States, I would work hard for people who do not say I'm a communist, first of all. Secondly, I would work hard to make people believe that the United States as a country is working against its own people. But it would be my operation. I'm saying if I was a communist, I would do that. I would make people hate the United States institutions and agencies and whatever to make people hate the United States as a country. Third, I would be so hidden doing these activities that I would blame the only one people that could unmask me, and I would blame these people saying they are connected to Russia, like they did against Trump. So basically, coming from a country that is turning to communism faster than I thought. I see that you guys have a big problem because communism is never the topic of these crazy activities that we see in the United States. So it's like, oh, the Palestinian guys, free Palestine, they burn the US flag and they put the flag of the communism. And if you say they are communists, no, they are not, they are just idiots. If you see Black Lives Matter doing things and destroying the country and putting communist flag and say they visited Maduro, like the girl was ahead of Black Lives Matter visiting Maduro in Venezuela, and if you say they are communists, no, they are not, they are just dumb. And then I can name a movement after movement just promoting communism in the United States, and people are refusing to say they are communists. Oh, they are not communists. And then when people tell me they are not communists, when I ask those people, do you know what communism is? So first of all, the major answer is communism is a doctrine, which is a bullshit. So if someone thinks communism is a doctrine, really never read communist articles, books, and activity. Period. Really doesn't know what communism is at all. So I don't see the real enemy being pointed out. And they are trying to put U.S. people against U.S. people, like American against American. They try to put state against states. They try to put party against party. They try to put this is divide and conquer strategy. The communists are infiltrating this country for more than decades. I don't know if someone here have read Witness by Whittaker Chambers and American Betrayal by Diana West, but we in Brazil have been taught by Professor Olavo de Carvalho that the United States conservative movement is we're hardly going against the communism and publish a lot of books. But as far as we have studied that, we went until the 80s and maybe the 90s. After that, what I see right now, it's not a conservative fighting against communists. It's conservative fighting against something you guys like to call deep state or uniparty and so forth. It's always new names for the same shit. Communist, period.
Yeah, because we focus on the symptoms, and I tend to, and usually, anybody can go back to my spaces, I always mention Marxism when we talk about these political movements, when we talk about the BLM movement, even these Palestinian protests that are occurring nationwide. Even though I agree that there's a lot of members who believe in that cause, there's also a tendency to get captured by Marxist movements. So whether it's justified or not that's not really the core of the issue. The core of the issue is that these political movements are hijacked by communism. And I agree. I think that there's an element within our intelligence agencies that has been hijacked by communists, because they're putting pro-communist people, they're installing pro-communist politicians into our government. They're extorting members of our Congress and threatening them. There's members of our Congress who won't communicate via text because they know that the deep state intelligence apparatus is monitoring them and using that as leverage against their votes. And so this is a really core issue that we need to solve in the United States, and it's not going to be just one thing that does it. It has to be an all of society. It's going to take an all of society effort to try to cleanse out this corruption that seeped its way into our intelligence apparatus and the other arms of our government. But I'm going to continue reading the Twitter files. Just go ahead. Yeah, while you're doing that, I'll find the page where I'm at, and then I'll continue reading the Twitter files. Go ahead, Alan.
Just to add information on what you just said, Yuri Bezmenov was a KGB defector, and he described precisely that 90% of the communist activities do not start with them or from them. And he mentioned some martial arts concepts, like if someone is going into one direction, you just take advantage on it and you just hijack or impose or boost what they are doing. And basically, conflicts and issues we have in any country. I mean, all the countries have its own issue. If you pay attention, there's just two or one country there's no issue at all, like North Korea. Have you heard about any issue in North Korea? People do not have an issue in North Korea, right? Because they kill everyone that is creating problem. So it's easy to keep that way. So every country you find issues and problems are normal people living in there. But once you have issues and problems and conflicts, it means you are alive and you are not under dictatorship. The problem is when communists, if you guys read communist articles, and I highly suggest you guys starting reading Marxist.org. It's the biggest library, Marxist library online, and I read them every fucking day. Sorry my language. I need to read them. I need to know my enemy. I cannot disagree with someone not learning what he really wants to say, what to do, and what they really want to do. In every country, they want to click between white and black people in some small areas, so they will create the racism theory. If they see conflict between homosexuals and Christians, they want to create a conflict with them. And it's easy to find the communist smell, I would say like that in English. In Portuguese, I would say like that. But you can really smell them. You know, like you can see where they're going because they always boost real conflict or small conflict and turn it in a national conflict, which is totally fake conflict. Like, for example, I'm from Brazil. What I've learned in Brazil about United States, oh, they are racist. Once you be there, you have these big black lips, and you're gonna be, people will be racist with you. No fucking way. I never experienced that in the United States. Only in few black communities that I felt, unsafe, like Petersburg and Richmond in Virginia, because I used to live there, and also in Detroit. So it's not about race or color or whatever. It's about education. It's about people that really do not want to respect me, but not based on my color, skin, and so forth. But this is just an example, but you guys know what I mean. They boost activities. It's not that they create all these activities.
Emissary.
They boost these activities. And if you think, no, it isn't, that activity here didn't start with a communist strategy. No, they do not want it. They don't do it because it's easy to track. So if they start something, it's easy to track them out, and then you're gonna, they're gonna be visible. They do not want to be visible, so they do not start activities. They just boost, control, and change the narrative. Like the statement very famous from a communist American writer: the issue is never the issue.
Exactly, they hijack issues is what they do. It's the critical theory, right, where they find flaws in any system and use those to try to create a revolution and destroy that system. And that's exactly what we're seeing take place here. Thank you, Alan. I'm going to continue to read these because they're long and I want to get through them all. Let me see. So we are at the current state assessment. By the way, it's the second post from the left, link from the left. Up in the Jumbotron are the entire Twitter files by Micah Schellenberger in coordination with Matt Taibbi and another journalist. I'll have to scroll up to the top to get her name. But we're at current assessment. Alethea's, quote, current assessment of Twitter is scathing. The analysis stresses that the social media platforms, and this is back in 2021, the analysis stresses that the social media platforms' trust in safety executives were well-meaning, but also overwhelmed and unskilled in censorship, is what she means. They didn't have the resources they need. It says the company was always on the defense when it came to misinformation. whether from, quote, QAnon or, quote, coronavirus misinformation, it claims as a result, quote, historically marginalized groups are vulnerable. Alethea's analysis concludes that the underlying problem with Twitter was, quote, Twitter does not have a traditional threat intelligence capacity that would better position the company to be proactive on misinformation and disinformation, end quote. Twitter in particular lacks, quote, geographic expertise and forage language capabilities. So what they're doing is they're setting it up for welcoming the intelligence age apparatus into Twitter with open arms. Another serious problem, says Alethea, is that, quote, Twitter is not fully taking advantage of its partnerships, such as with the Stanford Internet Observatory, the only non-media partner Alethea named. So to Justin's credit, like he just said, the Stanford, it's one of the biggest NGO censorship apparatuses that we have in the country, and is directly involved with censoring conservatives and dissent in our country on social media. Previous Twitter files and Facebook files show that the DHS had asked SIO, the Stanford Internet Observatory, which is led by a, quote, former CIA fellow, Renee DeResta, CIA Renee they like to call her, and 3 other organizations to lead a, quote, public-private partnership to urge greater social media censorship of alleged misinformation relating to the 2020 elections and COVID. Go figure. Neither I or Alethea have a relationship with SIO, Kaplan said. Read Alethea's current state assessment here. There's a link to the blog. Going on, quote, more vigorous content moderation. That they're advocating for further censorship of Twitter. Before Alethea shares its full recommendation, Zatko, who is, as we found out, was a plant by the CIA in Twitter at the time. Before Alethea shares its full recommendation, Zatko pushes for more government-linked censorship. On March 24 of 2021, Zatko emailed a 12-page report titled, quote, Recommendations to the Biden Administration on Regulating Disinformation and Other Harmful Content on Social Media. Let me just say, our Constitution prohibits the government from engaging in this type of behavior. Quote, the organizations and people behind this recommendation, Zatko explains, have the connection to get this in front of the right people in the administration. The report is co-authored by the Aspen Institute,
Kleiner Perkins and Ballistic Ventures, Legendary Valley Schlen led a $10 million Series A into Alethea Group for ballistics.
Of the Hunter Biden laptop story and Hamilton 68 hoax, author Quint Watts.
Twitter's threat disruption program.
By the Musavar Ramani Center at the Harvard Kennedy School and New York University Stern Center for Business and Human Rights.
We can draw a straight line between the initial Stop the Steal narrative and organizing what ended up happening on the 6th.
The censorship industrial complex are being cited in this report.
Alethea's current state assessment of Twitter is scathing. Analysis stresses trust and safety. Executives were well-meaning, overwhelmed, unskilled.
For the Biden administration to, quote, work with social media companies to develop industry-wide standards to respond
Twitter
to,
has an opportunity to become the industry leader in censorship.
Disinformation operations, whether domestic or foreign. You know, it's funny that they're
Alethea Kaplan promotes aggressive censorship vision, punishments for people who spread misinformation.
The they use is to describe what they themselves are guilty of. And for altering, quote, financial
long-standing contractor, employee of the federal government, gave training seminars to NSA, NASA, 99, Andy Greenbridge, 2013, This Machine Kills Secrets, oh, holy shit, Cult of the Dead Cow.
The CIA is, what's being laid out here.
Deep cover people are known to be CIA, go to DARPA, then wherever.
NGOs to collaborate with advertisers to try to limit the funding that the social media companies can get. It's to starve them out if they don't comply is what's happening here. The Biden administration should work with Congress to create such a regulatory body, possibly as a new digital bureau with the Federal Trade Commission. The report calls for new standards to be modeled after ESG and include fines and violations of industry-wide standards that would then be used to fund credible local news outlets. So what he's saying is anybody who is speaking against the narrative needs to be fined, and the funds from those fines would be used to fund what they claim to be credible news outlets, or like the mainstream or legacy media. So
states so messed up. Bro, not only do they shut it down, but they take the fines from that to push up the opposition. That's ridiculous.
So Thomas Massey has introduced H.R. 8519 to eliminate taxpayer funding of online censorship. The Twitter files showed the government colludes with private companies and universities to violate the First Amendment. Congress must use the power of the purse to end this unconstitutional activity.
Kitover is what brought up several times in relation to the Stanford Internet Observatory, the Aspen Institute, and Washington University, that she was on 60 Minutes within the last month or two, decrying that the social media platforms are only taking action on 30% of the tips that the Stanford Internet Observatory is currently giving them to shut people down right now. So again, if you look at this and you think this is something that has stopped and that we've shined the light on, it's no longer happening. 60 Minutes had Kate Starbird on, who's as central figure as Renee DiResta, as the rest of these people on, literally decrying that the social media platforms are...
Mr. Massey, can we take a swipe at the Smith-Mundt Act chart showing the increase after its modification? Racism.
The casual racism that is shown by these people when they talk about that marginalized communities are especially impacted because they're just not smart enough to understand what's real and what's not real, you guys. So we got to step in and make sure we help them. It's unbelievable. The other part, what you just got to, Diligent, about them wanting to form a commission under the Federal Trade Commission, you can go look that up. It's called the Digital Platform Commission Act. I did several spaces on it with America Mission to help destroy it. The Digital Platform Commission Act called for taking control of algorithms of every social media company in order to make the censorship universal. And so they created a commission, like I believe they called it the Code Enforcement Commission, like inside the body, where that Code Enforcement Commission would have the ability inside all of the social media companies determined to be, they gave it some like qualifier, like determined to be critical or pose an infrastructural risk, something like that. I don't remember the exact language. But the Code Enforcement Council would be able to step in and modify the algorithms of all the large social media companies in order to do it. So again, I like to highlight is that what we're saying is they were doing this shit, and now they tried to hide it because they knew it was illegal, and now they're trying to codify it retroactively. And whenever you read the Restrict Act or the Digital Platform Commissions Act, they make a point to point out and put into the bills that they're proposing that it's retroactive. And the reason they want retroactive is so that they can go back and say that what we were doing wasn't criminal, it was actually legal, but it indeed was criminal.
Just to add on a little bit to that, Dustin, we know for sure it's still happening. Just look at the recent case with not even our own government, but the Australian government recommending that videos got taken down from social media, and X was the only platform that didn't do it. So maybe it's better in X right now. But X is not the only social media, and this stuff is absolutely still going on. It's frightening. I thought growing up that this sort of thing only happened, in communist countries, to Alan's point. Like, I thought that in Russia we had a government-controlled media, and in China there was a government-controlled media. But in the United States, we have the First Amendment. We're free. Well, if we don't start fighting for it now, they're just going to walk all over the First Amendment. It sure feels like right now they don't give a damn. They're just trying to ignore it. And that's all I have for
I just got here. I'm a little bit late. I haven't read all of Michael Schellenberger's work, but I just wanted to note, I don't know if anybody else caught this, something that kind of jumped out as a red flag. I'm not saying that all of his work is a red flag, but he quoted that it was a long-time CIA contractor that was partnering with Twitter. And as we know, contractors are not as important as employees, especially government employees. So I don't know how we can call all of the CIA when it, most of what he's complaining about looks like it came from a contractor.
Well, no, the institution of the hiring of a contractor.
Oh, thanks, Doc. I was asking Penny specifically.
Yeah, no, I'll respond. I'm coming over, and I have the mic. So the fact that a contractor might be the devil here, as you put it, still the contractor gets hired by somebody in authority. In terms of the policies and procedures writ large, the suppression that the CIA apparently was backing, supported by the Twitter files that we went through last year and the year before, all suggest that this is a CIA operation from the very top, protected by the top Democrats, ordered by Joseph Biden and whoever is controlling him. To suggest the CIA, who is operating in America against the law, as Dustin has pointed out many, many times, completely precluded from using a contractor, to use your level of analysis, to pursue legal actions against any America is treasonous.
Well, that wasn't necessarily my full analysis. It was my first question I had for Penny. If anybody had raised
most of it's going to be shit anyway, but I feel like just jump on top of it. Go ahead and complete your analysis then. Fine.
Oh my lord. That was so disrespectful.
I don't respect her, nor do I respect you. This is me in my free speech space, speaking my truth. But let's not attack people. Let's attack their words, attack their ideas, resort to ad hominems. But,
I definitely wasn't attacking anybody. I just was asking Penny a simple question.
I know that you weren't, Miley. I know that you weren't. But what is it that you want to ask Penny, or can we move on? Was it answered?
Yeah, what is the specific question?
Go ahead.
Whether or not I rank the fact that it was a contractor that's being mentioned in the email?
Or no, anybody brought it up.
Hold on, let me add to that though. Edward Snowden was just a contractor through the NSA and the CIA, right? He worked for what the hell is the name? I can't think of it right now. Halliburton, right? He was a Halliburton employee. Like, there's a lot of contractors. This is a lot of how the CIA gets away with the shit that it does, because it goes through third parties, and they're not working for the CIA, right? But they just have access to everything, right? Look at Edward Snowden. Like, he was a contractor, a third-party contractor. He didn't work directly for them. He was a contractor underneath them. So I just want to highlight that a lot of the whistleblowers that come out don't work directly for these agencies. They work for contractors they're contracted out through third parties of these agencies. And that's another way to, like, what Dustin, hold on, Miley, I'm almost done. To, like, how Dustin highlighted is some of the legal fare and the lawfare that these agencies use to avoid scrutiny by the public, right? He pointed out earlier that they'll work through third-party attorneys and act under attorney-client privilege to make it hard for us to get transparency with a lot of the things that they're doing here. Go ahead, Miley, and then we'll continue.
I was just going to say that whatever Doc was talking about, he mentioned that this was directly under Biden. I mean, even Schellenberger references that some of this work was in early 2020, which would have been when Trump was president, right? So it wouldn't have been under Biden. He wasn't elected until the end of 2020. So that was actually under Trump.
Yes, but we know that the deep state was going after Trump. We know that for a fact because of the Russia files. We know that they were acting illegally beyond the scope of their powers granted, under the Constitution. As part of the executive branch, the CIA was still going after Trump. And to pretend that it wasn't happening while Trump was the president, and to pick on that one particular point I made, it just shows how ridiculous your analysis is.
It's not one point. If Penny and Wolf kicks us all off stage right now, everyone in the stage right now, and if Diligent's disappointed, that's going to be Diligent's buck, right? Because it's his space. So, the theatrics, I just don't understand. It was Donald Trump's administration. Their appointments, he picked these people to serve in his White House.
Hold on. They're citing. You guys you're missing the mark anyways. This report, the things that I'm reading are from 2021. Donald Trump wasn't in
No,
office
it's
when all the recommended.
I'll screenshot it and send it to you.
But the report that I just cited, Miley, let me finish, please. The report that I just cited was in 2021. They were using information and occurrences that happened in 2020. They were using January 6th. They were using COVID as ammunition to justify the formation of this censorship governance board. And these reports here, this is post Donald Trump. They even highlighted some of the internal communications talking about, taking him off the platform. This is post Donald Trump's presidency.
The timing of it is not really all that important to me. I mean, if you look at just the Hunter Biden laptop story specifically, that is absolutely not something that Trump was going to want to suppress, right? So we can see what the motives are. We see what it is that they're trying to oppress, and it's not stuff that is like part of Trump's agenda that he would like to. And besides, this isn't even really a space about presidents or about the presidential election. This is about what's happening in America right now in terms of censorship on our social media, and we need to do something about that going forward.
Well, it is, right? Because the FBI is in cahoots with the social media.
It's still happening, though. That's the biggest problem. Is like we're in an election year, and the very blatant election interference using social media to control information is still happening right now. That should be like at the forefront of what's happening. Is the fact that this is still going on, and we're in an upcoming election that is probably going to be one of the most consequential presidential elections, I would argue, in our nation's history, or at least in the last 100 years.
So why did Elon Musk suspend Allen the other day? Is that Joe Biden's fault too?
Anyways, we're going to continue. I'm going to continue reading the Twitter files. We'll go from there. So again, for the listeners who just joined us, please, bottom right corner, we're trying to break 1,000 listeners. This is, we're very close. I want to make sure that everybody gets this out. Repost this Schellenberger Twitter file drop. We want to get this information out to as many people as possible. If you can, share it off platform, do so, because we're in our own little bubble here, and we want to get this out to the public as much as possible. So, quote, expand formal, informal partnerships with Amazon Web Services, GoDaddy, and PayPal. So what they're going to do is highlight the cancellation process of individuals. On April of 2021, Miley, a Twitter attorney emails 32-page document titled The Alethea Group Recommendations. It says, quote, Twitter has an opportunity to become an industry leader. How? At the top of the list is develop and expand threat intelligence capabilities. This starts with hiring an outside vendor. Oh, did I already read this? No, I didn't. Okay. This starts with hiring an outside vendor to provide consistent threat intelligence feeds on priority markets or topics for Twitter, such as COVID-19 misinformation, QAnon, violent hate groups, or foreign government-operated intelligence operations. Why an outside vendor? Because, quote, outside vendors often have more access to more unique data sets, language capabilities, and geographic expertise, Alethea reasons. So they're talking about why they should accept the intelligence community with open arms. This approach is consistent with Twitter's platform peers such as Facebook, and to a lesser extent, YouTube's new analytic team focused on sophisticated threat actors. So they're using how other social media companies have accepted the intelligence apparatus with open arms is why Twitter should do the same. The second major recommendation is to, quote, expand formal and informal partnerships with domain hosting companies, digital ad providers, and financial platforms such as Amazon Web Services, GoDaddy, or PayPal. Why? So Twitter can respond to, quote, threat actors in a more holistic fashion. So they're talking about comprehensive cancellation and censorship efforts using financial incentives as well. In other words, Alethea is proposing that Twitter lead an effort to organize all other social media companies, e-commerce companies, and internet service providers to deplatform, demonetize, and deperson disfavored individuals. We have two of the people who are victims of that on stage right now. Alan DeSantos had all of this happen to him, and so has Dustin. This is an international effort. Brazil did the same thing through Twitter and other companies to Alan that Twitter and the government did to Dustin, who is on stage with him right now. Debanked him, censored him, deplatformed him. Alethea also proposes developing systems to place content for purveyors of, quote, misinformation and disinformation into a, quote, void that users can't see or share it. This could include not allowing content to load from their websites, sending users to an error page, having adversaries inadvertently tweet dog pictures, guinea recipes or sports scores. So what they're talking about is not even letting you know. They want an error to pop up so that you don't know that you're being censored. According to Alethea, threat intelligence can still be gathered within these artificial environments and used to inform future action against threat actors. So there we go, the thought police. Other recommendations from Alethea are for Twitter to, quote, create a more diverse team, expand reporting options for users, and invest in a program that will teach news literacy to high school students and college students. So they're going as far as to they want to expand the program into indoctrinating our youth into accepting and being pro-censorship. Over email, Nina Jankowicz, shit, sorry, I just lost the page. Somebody just tagged me in a post.
So disrespectful.
Yeah.
Well, was it the CIA to point out that GoDaddy in the US represents, like, I don't know, like 8% of the internet. So if they're in partnership with those two brands alone, they can almost censor anything. I mean, that is crazy.
Also, Schellenberger's greatest threat references Matt Taibbi, and I don't know if you guys remember, but Elon had a huge falling out with Matt Taibbi, no longer supports his work, and no longer needs him anything from the source, just so you know. I know there's a lot of Elon sending around here, and Elon does not support Matt Taibbi or his work any longer.
I'm not going to comment on that.
Why not? Don't you care who the source of the work is?
I mean, because he cites the source. It doesn't mean that he can still have access to the file. Right. And put it to like a credible source of information. And again, like, are we really ignoring that the Slack channels of internal communication are actually like screenshotted and presented as part of the report? Like, but again, like, let's focus on the drama between Elon and Matt Taibbi.
I don't think it's drama.
It came out very fast. The government is blatantly censoring people illegally in order to control narratives and steal elections and cover up things like Hunter Biden's laptop. But you know what? That's definitely way more interesting than there's a drama with Elon. It's definitely
The issue is never the issue. The issue is never the issue. The issue is never the issue. So, Michael Schellenberger was a leftist journalist that was praising Lula da Silva back a few years ago, and he was praised by all the socialist journalists. When he came out with the Twitter Files Brazil, they started saying he's not a journalist. He was praised in Brazil by the socialists. Once he published the Twitter Files in Brazil, putting lines in all these censorship, the leftists just started talking about Michael Schellenberger.
Why, you did that? I thought that was Schellenberger.
What's that?
Matt Taibbi didn't do that.
No, I'm talking about...
It's not the point. The point is that Schellenberger listed Taibbi as one of the authors of this file drop. Who knows how long? You see how big this thread is, how comprehensive it is? Who knows how long they've been working on it? Maybe Matt Taibbi was still working on it before he had it falling out. He's just crediting it. So I think that just because he's mentioned at the beginning of this, shouldn't detract from what it means. What it means is that there is evidence that our government is currently and has been for years now colluding with the government to
censor us and to influence our elections and our thoughts about medical things such as the vaccines or COVID, and even, in an attempt to coerce our children and indoctrinate them into thinking a certain way or be accepting of censorship policies.
This is the issue, never the issue green. It's like you see someone naked and say, oh, the grass is green, and nobody says the grass is green. These leftists will say, oh, he's naked. But the point is, the grass is green. That's it, period.
Yeah, but if we're trying to get you accurate information, and if you have, you don't need to know if the source is right, and how you can get you on left going back against each other. It's kind of hard when there's two screens just being thrown up.
I think that it's just people wanting to focus on irrelevant details that has nothing to do with the meat of what's being put out here, right? Those are people that's cognitive dissonance is what we're hearing, what we're seeing. If you ask me, that's just my opinion. Penny, I sent you the clip if you want to go.
Yeah, I'm looking up right now.
So it sounds like let's not look over there, let's look over here, which is fine, but just don't make people buy this information because a lot of people are going to be skeptical for good reason. And we also have to note that
I told you I wanted a savory debate until we got through the Twitter files, and we're not through them yet. So if you want to add commentary that's building on what we're reading, that's fine. And I'm not telling you what to say or when to say it. I am telling you when to say it. Save your rhetoric, save the debate until after we're done reading the Twitter files. This is long. There's a lot of information here. But all of the links and receipts, just for those of you who are listening, as we're reading, this post is up in the Jumbotron, and they included the screenshots and links to a lot of these people's profiles, to their publications. So they brought the receipts with all of this. This isn't just pure speculation or whatever, right? This is research, and it has evidence, supporting evidence along with it. So the stuff that we're reading includes graphics, illustrations, screenshots, and links to what they're talking about as we read it. Go ahead, Penny, if you're ready.
Yeah, I think, it doesn't even matter what the information is so well sourced, right? Like, there's literally links and images of almost everything being mentioned. So to push back and say that questions for like a good reason, I don't know about that. Anyway, I'll continue to read. I think Kitover and informal partnerships with Amazon Web Services and GoDaddy on April 20th, 2021, a Twitter training emailed a 32-page document titled Alethea Group Recommendations. Is this the one you just read?
The Alethea Group Recommendations. It stopped like halfway through. To become industry leader.
Where you are, which graphic you were at?
Just go ahead, it's like after the second graphic. Develop and expand threat intelligence capabilities. This starts with hiring outside vendor
The second time I read that. In other words,
this starts with hiring an outside vendor to provide
about content moderation. Yes, affirms Alethea. Not only after outsourcing, decision-making process when it comes to disinformation and misinformation on a major security incident. Recommendation: develop systems to post content from known purveyors of disinformation and misinformation, including forms of adversarial attacks in a clear, unconsidered environment so that regular users are unable to observe the content.
So they're talking about migration acceptance.
Anyone also proposes developing systems to post content from purveyors such as Facebook, not allowing content to load from the website and servers.
From their own website, not from Twitter or social media. Like, do you guys get this? From their own website. So we're using the intermediary between the servers, their websites, and the public. So not like to prevent you from posting to Twitter, but say that you have your own website, your own www.penny.com. If you post something on there that they don't like, they're going to prevent that from reaching the public. That is insane to me. Not your threat vectors in a realistic fashion. So I'm talking about comprehensive cancellation and censorship efforts using financial incentives as well. In other words, Alethea is proposing that Twitter lead effort to organize all of its employees, e-commerce
or something like that, you're supposed to just not going to work when you're only going to make lives. That's absolutely crazy. Okay, so continuing from there.
Robert Vaughn is legally busting these guys' hands out. I don't want to lose it.
Remember when I talked about how they were silencing the information, leaking very specific accounts that could make it go like nuclear? Like that's exactly what I'm talking about. And this happened to Trash recently, which is specifically outing the censorship industrial complex, where on his screen the thread is still showing normally, but everybody else who tried to access them, it was showing as restricted content because of not allowed. So again, it's not just about the censorship, but also how do you prevent people who know that makes sense to avoid the Streisand effect?
And still be gathered within these artificial environments and used to capture data and encourage lectures. So there we go. The thought police, other recommendations from the are encouraging diversity, expand reading options for users, and invest in news literacy to high school students and college students. So they're going as far as to induct if they want to expand the program into indoctrinating our youth into accepting and being pro-censorship. Over email needed to with Jake Hurwitz. Sorry, I just lost the page. Somebody just took the filter. Me and my friends this me and my well, let's not attack people attack their murders, attack their ideas. You know, free to attack others.
He wasn't attacking anybody. I just was asking Penny as well.
I know that you are, Miley. I know that you are. What is it that you want to ask Penny? Would you move on to the answer? Yeah, what is it that perhaps the most whether or not I agree the fact that it was a contract between the let me add to that though, Edward Snowden, this is a contractor for the NSA and the CIA, right? He worked for what the hell was the name? I can't think of it right now. Albert, right? He was Albert William. Like, there's a lot of contractors. This is a lot of how the CIA gets away with the shit that it does. Because it goes through third parties. And all of them work with the CIA. Right? They just have access to everything. Right? Look at Edward Snowden. Like, he was a contractor, a third-party contractor. He didn't work directly for them. He was a contractor underneath them. So I just want to highlight that a lot of the whistleblowers that come out don't work directly for these agencies. They work for contractors who they're contracted out through third parties of these agencies. And that's another way, like what Dustin Miley almost got to like how Dustin highlighted is some of the legal fear and the lawfare that these agencies use to avoid scrutiny by the public. Right? He pointed out earlier that they'll work through third-party attorneys and act under attorney-client privilege to make it hard for us to get transparency with a lot of the things that they're doing here. Go ahead, Miley.
Technical research director is Nina.
I was going to say that whenever Doc was talking about, he mentioned that this was directly underfunded. I mean, even Schellenberger referenced that some of this work was in early 2020, which would have been when Trump was president, right? So it would have been underfunded, right?
So earlier, because she's denying any kind of involvement with this, and what they're doing is approving this work for the company that was indirectly with Twitter and the CIA, and that Twitter wasn't allowed to make any decisions. They were working or collaborating together in this censorship effort, and the work records prove that the person that's denying it was, in fact, working for the organization that was responsible for coordinating these censorship efforts. Go ahead. I was just explaining it for the sake of the listeners because this is a long cut.
Otherwise,
They're using January 6th. They're using COVID as ammunition to justify the formation of this censorship governance board. And these reports here, this is post Donald Trump. They're actually even highlighted some of the internal communications talking about taking home collective. This is post Donald Trump presidency. And then what they're using of it is not visuals that regulation should be. I mean, if you look at just the Hunter Biden laptop story specifically, that's absolutely not the Trump was going to lose the press, right? So we can see what the motives are. We see what it is that they're trying to do for this. And it's not stuff that is like part of Trump's agenda that you would like to. And besides, this isn't even really a space about presidents or about the presidential election. This is about what's happening in America right now in terms of censorship.
Retrospective analysis on how
all it is, right? It's the FBI keeping those with social media. It's still happening. That's the other problem. It's like we're in an election year, and the very blatant election interference and using social media to control information is still happening right now. That should be like the forefront of what's happening. It's not backwards. This is still going on. And we're in an election that is probably going to be one of the most consequential presidential elections, I would argue, in our nation's history, or at least in the last 100 years.
crap that is happening.
So why did Elon Musk and Alan the other day decide to
We have to trust the rules and the systems.
Anyways, we're going to continue. I'm going to continue reading the Twitter files. We'll go from there. So again, the listeners who just joined us, please bottom right corner. We're trying to break 1,000 listeners. This is we're very close. I want to make sure that everybody gets this out. Repost this. Tell them where your Twitter file drop. We want to get this information out to as many people as possible. If you can, share all platforms because we're in our own little bubble here, and we want to get this out to the public as much as possible. So expand partnerships with Amazon Web Services, GoDaddy, PayPal. So what they're going to do is highlight the cancellation process of individuals. On April of 2021, finally, a Twitter attorney emails 32-page document titled The Alethea Group Recommendations. It says, quote, Twitter has an opportunity to become an industry leader. At the top of the list is develop and expand threat intelligence capabilities. This starts with hiring an outside vendor to read this. You should be aware of. No, this starts with hiring an outside vendor to provide consistent threat intelligence feeds on priority markets or topics for Twitter, such as COVID-19 disinformation, QAnon, violent hate groups, or foreign government-operated intelligence operations. Why an outside vendor? Because, quote, outside vendors often have more access to more unique data sets, language capabilities, and geographic expertise for legitimate reasons. So they're talking about why they should accept the intelligence community of all parts. This approach is consistent with Twitter's platform creators such as Facebook, and to a lesser extent, YouTube's new analytic team focused on sophisticated threat actors. So they're using how other social media companies have accepted the intelligence apparatus with open arms. Why Twitter's doing the same. The second major recommendation is to quote expand corporate and partnerships with domain-hosting companies, digital ad providers, and financial platforms such as Amazon Web Services, GoDaddy, PayPal. Why? So Twitter can respond to key threat actors in a more holistic fashion. So they're talking about comprehensive cancellation and censorship efforts using financial incentives as well. In other words, Alethea is proposing that Twitter lead an effort to organize all other social media companies, e-commerce companies, and internet service providers to deplatform, demonetize, and deperson disfavored individuals and to the people who are victims of that on stage right now. Alan DeSantos had all of this happen to him, and so has Dustin. This is an international effort resulted the same day through Twitter and other companies to Alan that
But let's not attack people. Let's attack the reverse, attack their ideas. Right on to ad hominems. But I know that you weren't. What is it that you guys are saying? Is the name of the hacker group to state? Yeah, what is the situation? Joined another hacker group that bring exactly. There was like a contractor that's being mentioned that you guys Edward Snowden was just a contractor for the NSA and the CIA, right? He worked for, what the hell was the name? I can't think of it right now. Halpern, right? He was a Halpern employee. Like, there's a lot of contractors. This is a lot of how the CIA gets away with the shit that it does. Because it goes through third parties. And also, they're not working for the CIA. Right? They just have access to everything. Right? Look at Edward Snowden. Like, he was a contractor, a third-party contractor. He didn't work directly for them. He was a contractor underneath them. So I just want to highlight that a lot of the whistleblowers that come out don't work directly for these agencies. They work for contractors who they're contracted out through third parties of these agencies. And that's another way. Like, Dustin, Dustin highlighted some of the warfare and the law that these agencies use directly employees monitoring them physically. From 2013 to 2015, in response to every Snowden's revelations of mass surveillance, Zacko and Google to engineer software. Afterward, Zacko started advising Senator Mark Warner, one of the Senate's leading proponents of social media censorship. During the same period, Zacko was helping track whistleblowers for DARPA. President Barack Obama was pursuing more leakers for prosecution than all previous presidential administrations. Next post.
Hold on, I just want to emphasize what this means. So they just illustrated this man's history with the NSA, the CIA, and DARPA as far back as 1998, right? So well over a quarter of a century, this man has been embedded within our intelligence apparatus, and now there's evidence to show that he worked for Google, he worked for Facebook, and he's worked for Twitter, right? Installing and advocating for intelligence-led censorship apparati to be installed in all of these companies. Okay, that is what's being highlighted here. This isn't some contractor for the CIA, a low-level contractor. This is an OG hacker from back in the day that was brought in by our intelligence apparatus and has been a key figure in censorship and intelligence gathering at scale in the United States since the turn of the century. Like, this is no small deal. That's what we're talking about here. Go ahead, continue, please. Thank you.
Sorry, I started talking with mute still on. We asked a senior intelligence analyst who has worked for decades within both the U.S. military and the IT if the Alethea Twitter operation looked like a clandestine information operation. The person laughed. You just laid it out. DARPA fits the pattern. There are deep cover people who are known to be CIA and who go to DARPA. They have assumed a mantle that they are no longer aligned in that role. They try to portray themselves as separate and apart. That works to their personal inside. Front groups and intermediaries, or cutouts, are the bread and butter of clandestine operations and have been since World War II. We front money through different shell companies and nobody knows there are governments behind them, the person said. That's a lot of what we did in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and the Arab Spring, with disinformation, censoring, and manipulating. Given this context, Zacko share information with intelligence agencies and bring the IC-linked Alethea group may have been a deliberate operation by the IC to infiltrate and control Twitter. Next post. What happened? Okay, found me. Sorry, I just lost my position, but I found it.
Let me just say real quick, make sure you're following Penny. Thank you, Penny, for reading that for us, and make sure you're following everybody up on the panel. Do me a favor, turn notifications on for my account. You'll never want to miss when I'm hosting these breaking news spaces. We have the best people, the best panelists. Let's fucking go. Go ahead, Penny.
Thank you,
Diligent. I appreciate that. The news media lavished praise on Zacko and used his denunciation to demand for greater government regulation of the company. Twitter can't afford to be one of the world's most influential websites, declared the Washington Post. The audit report by the Alethea Group, a company that fights disinformation threats, wrote the Post approvingly, confirms that since depicting a company overwhelmed by well-orchestrated disinformation campaigns and short on engineering tools and human firepower, while facing threats on par with vastly better financed Google and Facebook. Other advocates of censorship chimed in to support Zacko. Twitter has this outsized role in public discourse, but it's like it still staffs like a mid-sized platform, said Graham Brookie. Meanwhile, this is like before Elon laid off, 80% of the people, and the platform is performing better now. Said Graham Brookie, who ran DHS's mass censorship program with Stamos and Dorista of Stanford's Internet Observatory. They failed to do more than one thing at a time. And go to the council. The Big Boss. In her April 2023 testimony to the House Judiciary Committee, Nina Jankowicz described herself as a low to mid-level official at the Department of Homeland Security who was thrown under the bus in but others treated Jankowicz as though she were more senior than that. 4 years ago, in February 2020, former Congressperson Jane Harmon, the CEO of the influential U.S. government-funded Wilson Center, referred 3 times to Jankowicz as, quote, the big boss. Later, Harmon called Jankowicz the, quote, ringleader. Jane has a very colorful way of speaking, said Jankowicz about Harmon's statements. This is her way of acknowledging the work I did to organize that event, not for sweeping my vision for government censorship and disinformation. From 2022 to April 2024, Jankowicz worked for the Center for Information Resilience, which receives funding from the US, UK, and Australian governments. The work was an extension of what she has done since 2013 when Jankowicz worked as program officer for the National Endowment for Democracy's National Democratic Institute, NDI, in Eastern Europe. Her LinkedIn says she managed 6 active projects supporting democracy, assistance to Russia and Belarus. Independent journalists, analysts, and most of the IC understand the NDI and its broader organization. The National Endowment for Democracy are U.S. government-funded intermediaries or cutouts working alongside the CIA.
Yeah, Mike Benz has done a lot of work on this right here. Go ahead, continue. So it's taxpayer funded, by the way. These censorship, these CIA cutouts that they're using to alter our elections, to censor us, and to disenfranchise us, we're paying for it. Just want to throw that in there. Go ahead.
This relationship has been well understood for over 3 decades, and it links to a Washington Post article. Jankowicz disagrees. This is a false assertion, she told us over email, and during my time at NDI, it was an assertion most frequently made by the Kremlin. The only linkage I'm aware of between the U.S. intelligence community and NDI is that they both broadly support U.S. foreign policy goals. Jankowicz told us that she's vehemently opposed to censorship. So I don't believe that. My first piece of published work as a disinformation fellow at the Wilson Center was this report, which explores the many anti-democratic pitfalls of regulating disinformation. The opening of the paper states clearly, while the American response to online disinformation has been marked by partisanship and gridlock, at least 50 other nations have taken action against it often to the detriment of human rights and democratic standards. Emphasis added. But Jankowicz also acknowledged to us that she supported social media censorship of COVID-19 posts. See video below. Yes, she said over email yesterday. I commended the social media companies for removing posts that claimed COVID-19 was something Brazilians should not treat seriously at the height of a deadly pandemic that ended up claiming 700,000 Brazilian lives. I still believe that was the right decision, she said, and it was the platform's decision to make. When we sign up to use these social platforms, whether we are presidents or private citizens, we agree to their terms of service, including that they may moderate content. So it sounds like she's talking out of both sides of her mouth here.
What she's saying is that they can circumvent the First Amendment by having the social media platforms conduct the censorship. Of their own volition. Is what she's saying. So, it's a private company. They can do what they want.
On censorship. The Twitter files. The Twitter files, CIA offer more proof that Jankowicz got over her skis in the information war, and in that sense, she was a victim, but of passion. Indeed, it was only thanks to Jankowicz's recent efforts to rehabilitate her image that we discovered her role in the Alethea Group, the firms linked to the CIA and Zatko's work for intelligence agencies. Without Jankowicz, the whole episode would have been lost to history. Wow. First Amendment versus information war. The paradigm promoted by Jankowicz, Harmon, Zatko, Kaplan, Blind, Otis, and many others within the IC and its cutouts is fundamentally a military communications paradigm, not a peaceful civilian one. The peaceful civilian approach to fighting misinformation is free speech, as enshrined in the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The three of us and hundreds of other journalists, authors, and artists last year described our peaceful approach to fighting misinformation in the Westminster Declaration, and it linked to the Westminster Declaration. Free people in free societies do not and should not want their governments waging hybrid warfare, information warfare, or information operations against them. They do not want the leaders of their IC agencies demonizing and seeking to deplatform or demonetize domestic voices, no matter how annoying or wrong those voices may be. The American people and the American courts, including the Supreme Court, have repeatedly sided with the strongest protections of free speech in the world. Whether or not the CIA or another IC agency controlled by Alethea Group, it behaved as either a front group or an intermediary of the IC. It could be that individuals in the Alethea Group with ties to the IC were acting more through a common ideology or in service of a political party we may never know. What we do know is that their goals and behaviors are un-American in spirit and unconstitutional in the law. The CIA and U.S. military employees or contractors must never spy upon or run clandestine operations against American citizens on U.S. soil. That so many of them apparently did so in order to bring America's most influential social media company under the authority of the IC is a dark moment in American history. I agree.
So it's terribly frightening.
Unfortunately, the dark moment is not behind us. Governments around the world are cracking down on free speech more than they have at any other time since Twitter was founded in 2006. In 2019, Twitter published an internal report, Content Regulation, Global Regulatory Update, on demands by various governments for more censorship. I'll read that one. Last year, we briefed the board on expected legislative and regulatory shifts that would increase regulation of Twitter and the technology sector. Since our previous update, governments worldwide have increased their scrutiny of Twitter and peer companies, increased Twitter's affirmative monitoring obligations of third-party content on the platform, and increased the potential liability that Twitter may face for this content. The goal of this document is to provide the board with an overview of recently enacted content-related laws, identify the challenges and risk that the laws pose to Twitter, and preview pending content regulation. The wave of increased regulation addressed in this document signals a shift for Twitter. Historically, Twitter could lean heavily on certain country-specific immunities that shielded Twitter from liability based on content that people post to the platform. Now, Twitter faces a global patchwork of laws that imposes upon Twitter obligations to affirmatively monitor the platform for certain forms of content and take down offending content quickly. There are several recent examples of laws that signal this shift. After a tragic Christchurch terror attack, Australia enacted a law in just 3 days which criminalized hosting of abhorrent content. Singapore has enacted a law empowering the government to deem online content fake news, compel removal of the content, and force platforms to state the Singapore government's determination of fact, or risk having Twitter taken offline in Singapore. The EU has extended copyright liability, making content-sharing platforms like Twitter responsible for the content that people post to the platform and requiring Twitter to prevent copyright-infringing content from ever being posted or obtain expensive and broad copyright licenses. The challenges these types of content laws present are numerous. The laws, as applied to specific situations, challenge Twitter's long-standing commitment to increasing conversation and dialogue on the platform. The laws often require product changes to allow for reporting of prohibited content and the increased operational work by the content review teams, who must be trained to understand whether laws require takedown of certain tweets or accounts and to make those determinations quickly within narrow time frames. Additional content regulation also increases the volume of content takedown court orders worldwide and increases the likelihood of litigation against Twitter. All signs indicate that this tide of increased regulation will continue. Twitter is monitoring and working to shape draft content-related legislation worldwide. We'll have the benefit of applying its current processes for addressing challenging content-based laws to future legislation. We'll continue an ongoing basis to evaluate our systems and processes for responding and, where needed, complying with evolving global regulatory environment. So it sounds like the pressure is ratcheting up, not down. The challenges these types of content laws present are numerous, the company executives wrote. The laws may, as applied to specific situations, challenge Twitter's long-standing... Okay, that's just a quote I just read. Government censorship demands have been becoming increasingly severe in just the last 5 years. 2019 report barely mentions Brazil, noting that its data privacy law will be subject to ongoing discussions. Today, Brazil is demanding that disfavored journalists and politicians be deplatformed and blocked entirely at a global level from social media platforms. The 2019 report talks about the French government demanding that posts be taken down. Last week, the French government blocked a social media platform entirely in a foreign country. The 2019 report talks about demands of the sharing of an Abhorrent Violent Material Act law in Australia last month. The Australian government demanded a global ban on such material, not just in Australia. For many years to come, powerful voices in Western societies will likely continue to demand more censorship by social media platforms. From now on, the CIA, military, intelligence, and other security agencies must not be among them. End thread.
Yeah, that's That's crazy. That is crazy. How, the reason why it's so important, even though this is highlighting what's happened over the last few years, is because these same organizations, the Athens Institute, the Stanford Observatory, the Alethea organization, all of these organizations still exist, and they're still being used to censor people, not just in the United States, but as we saw in Brazil and globally across the West. And in a lot of these countries, it's being legalized. In the United States, it's illegal. The shit that they're doing is unconstitutional. They're infringing upon our rights by the government is using social media as third actors to arbitrate our speech, right? This is, it's illegal. But there's countries where they're using legislation to codify this and make it legal there, and they're trying to do the same thing here. Dustin brought it up, the Restrict Act, right? The last version of the TikTok bill, Mike Warner was one of the main ones pushing that legislation. He's pro censorship. That's the guy with the wig we were making fun of, right, Dustin?
No, you're mistaking that for Mike Rogers.
Oh, Mike Rogers, yeah.
But Mark Warner, remember, after we started to gain momentum to stop the Restrict Act, it was Mark Warner who gave us the hardest pushback, and we had several back and forths with him over the course of several weeks of him advocating for like this crazy overbroad censorship in a way that's nuts. And so it stood out to me that Warner was isolated in the Schellenberger report. That they talked about the actual like legislation and codifying the stuff. Remember, we stopped the Restrict Act here, but they got almost identical legislation through in several European countries and through Canada and through Australia. And so, right, like the mechanisms here are global. The other thing that is that, talk about Althea. They have created a system where they don't identify themselves as government or intelligence community, right? And it's up to us to say, well, it's cutouts. And even Schellenberger has to be like cautious when he talks about it to point out that I guess it is technically possible that they're no longer part of the intelligence community, and they just happen to be working at this other company full of other intelligence community people that are doing things that the intelligence community advocates for. Maybe they're just IC ideologues. This is hugely problematic. But I'll add this, the case law is very, very clear. The government is not authorized and is not empowered to subcontract violations of the Constitution to any organization or to any company for any reason whatsoever. And that's exactly what they're doing. And they're incredibly clever by papering it in all kinds of different ways. But at the end of the day, censorship violates the First Amendment and must not be allowed, period.
Amen, brother. I couldn't have said it better myself. Go ahead, Alan.
Using the United States bureaucracy and institutions to censor people outside of the United States, there is a purpose on it. And I think it's a little bit beyond of violating the United States Constitution. Who is behind it wants to make United States look like a dictatorship country, and wants to do that, wants to spoil the image of the United States as the last bastion of freedom. It is clear for me, because jurisdiction is quite simple, even for some that never have studied law, right? If you committed a crime, the crime needs to be in a code, or in a constitution, we are not talking about crime, if we are talking about bad behaviors, we have law, we have the code, we have the constitution, we have the regulations for people and companies. What they are trying to do is international, right? And there is a Mao Zedong quote where he says, every Marxist is an international communist. Or otherwise, I think he say every Marxist, every communist is international Marxist. But we need to look like national before we take over. This is I'm taking this quote from a I don't know how to say that in English. Maoist is that what you say in English? A person.
Yeah, Maoism.
Yeah, the person Maoist is that what you say in English?
Yes.
Okay. So I took this quote from a Maoist writer who is the founder of the Workers' Party in Brazil. The party Lula created back in the 80s. And what this party did in Brazil was kind of reunite all the differences between the left and put something soft to make people believe they're not communists. This is why the name of the party is not a communist party, but the Workers' Party. You know? And they like to say they are pro. They are something like nationalists. You know, they want to nationalize companies. They want to pretend they are defending the country against international invasion. And guess which country the communists in Brazil says that wants to invade Brazil and take the Amazon? Guess which country they talk badly in
the United States.
In the United States of America.
Even though the CCP is the one actually doing it.
Exactly. And we see precisely this whole operation is way beyond to destroy the United States Constitution, because the United States Constitution is nothing for someone that does not live in the United States, right? So it's a little bit beyond the United States Constitution. This is a propaganda and a censorship operation that wants to silence, destroy any voice that can unmask this operation. I am the one they mentioned about being blocked worldwide. I was the first Brazilian person that was blocked worldwide. Of course, I wasn't the only one, but I was the first wave of it. So I was together with the Congressman Daniel Silveira and a bunch of people, but we have been blocked worldwide. I remember when I came to the CPAC in 2020, and I was showing to Steve Bannon, Joshua Phillips, Trevor Loudon, a lot of people, a bunch of people that I've met, Matt Schlapp, a lot of people in the CPAC. I was showing them, look at my Twitter account, and it was written below my name, blocked worldwide. But that decision was made by the Supreme Court of Brazil. So what the heck, the Supreme Court of Brazil has jurisdiction outside of Brazil. And now we see the decision of the Supreme Court in Brazil wasn't the Supreme Court, Brazilian Supreme Court idea. This idea was born inside the United States to destroy the United States' freedom, to destroy the United States as a country that creates freedom. I could talk, for hours explaining what happened in Brazil back in 1776.
The 2019 report talks about demands of the sharing of a violent material act law and
Australia
the Magna
last
Carta
month,
is
the Australian government demanded a global
the
ban
Magna
on
Carta
such material, not just in Australia.
being defended
For many
in the
years
United
to come,
States. And
powerful
was
voices
defended
in
by
Western
the
societies
people.
will likely
I could say
continue to
to you
demand
all
more
how
censorship
the
by social
marking
media
of Popo was
platforms.
destroying
From now
freedom
on,
in
the
Poland,
CIA,
it was Poland
military,
back then.
intelligence,
I can
and other
explain
security agencies
what was
must
happening
not
in
be among
Spain
them.
and whatever, blah, blah,
End
blah.
thread.
The United States gave these fucking freedom to the world.
That's crazy. That is
After
crazy.
the United States was created, we
The
realized
reason
what
why it's so
freedom is.
important, even though
And the
this is
people that
highlighting
did
what's
it in
happened
the United States,
over
they
the
were
last few years,
kind of forgiving the
because these
rebirth
same-
of the Magna Carta from the
these same
13th century.
organizations, the
So we
Absence
were kind of
Institute, the
sleeping
Stanford,
for all these
the
centuries
Stanford
alone,
Observatory,
and not giving any idea what freedom was. And now they are kind of destroying
still
this
exist,
image
and
of
they're
the
still
United
being
States. So
used
what the United States was
censor
way
people, not just
stronger
in the United States, but as we
before
saw
having money,
in Brazil,
military,
and globally
and
across the West.
whatever.
And a lot of these countries, it's being legalized. In the United States, that's illegal. The shit that they're doing is unconstitutional. They're infringing upon our rights by using the government is using social media as third actors to arbitrate our speech.
So
right?
that
This
was
is it's illegal. But there's countries where they're using legislation to codify this and make it legal there. They're trying to do the same thing here. Dustin brought it up. The Restrict Act, right? The last version of the TikTok bill.
And making a lot of profit in Brazil. They are fucking scared in what is going on in Brazil. So money doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you have money. Doesn't matter if you have a lot of money in your bank account. If you do not have freedom of speech, you do not have any other kind of freedom. And what I've just listened to Penny reading from this report is this international propaganda, international activity, not only destroying the United States Constitution, which would be enough for us to be scared, but they want to destroy the United States as a nation that really gives freedom to its own people. They are doing a strong message to the world, like the United States no longer has freedom. So say that out and loud, because the United States bureaucracy, the United States government is doing it. This is a clear message to the whole world. If you think you're going to find freedom in the United States, give up, because we already conquered the CIA, the FBI, the government, all the institutions, all the what is the name of the CIA and FBI? You know what I mean. My English is not enough to say whatever I would like to say, but you guys got it. Really, this is really important. I'm trying to warn every American I have a chance to talk. I'm a Brazilian. English is not my first language. Sorry that my English is not enough. It's not well educated to speak fast and good for you all. In Portuguese, I can explain that, precisely with philosophical concepts, with political concepts. But what I'm trying to tell you all, I'm not saying as a journalist, I'm saying as a father of a future Daniel. Daniel will be American. My little Daniel will be born in August. I'm talking desperately a father of Teresa, who is Brazilian and Italian, but she's living here with me, my daughter. I'm talking on behalf of my wife. I'm talking on behalf of my family. They are destroying your country inside, within, and they want to destroy the image of freedom this country brought to the world, to make everyone that is fighting for freedom giving up because the United States has fallen. That did not happen yet. That did not happen yet. But we can fight stronger. I could be in Florida. I live in Orlando. I could go to Disneyland. Disney World, sorry. I could go to the Disney World, enjoy my family here in Orlando, have fun, enjoy the capitalism of the United States, and never post. I could not never post anything anymore. I could not work with the journalism. I could work with Uber or at Disney or at the Universal. I could do whatever I want in the United States. But I'm desperately saying
seen this fucking movie before. Wake up. Be careful. They are trying to destroy your country within. The enemies are within. They are communists. They are taking over everything and they want to destroy your country. Sorry that I'm very passionate about this topic.
Cabron!
I have no place to go anymore. The president of Brazil.
Oh, stop complaining. Go to Disneyland.
Russian agent, and you can see that clear on news. The Supreme Court of my country want to put me in the prison together with the homicides and murders and drug dealers just because of my journalism. These flags, this is still waving in this country, gave me freedom, gave me the opportunity to raise my children. I'm desperately asking you all, pay attention on this file. Stop fucking around with the issue. It's not in the papers. Wake up, don't be dumb.
Don't be dumb, cabron. Don't be a mighty con.
That we would allow the intelligence community to do overseas things that we would not let them do in the United States. And the solutionists, where they created a place to overthrow governments in Ukraine and Brazil. Why? What would prevent? Everybody that they determine is standing in the way of their never ending desire to grab all of the power.
Cops are coming! Did you eat chili today? I think I'm gonna have a little bit of some pussy. Alan and Dustin's rants, which were absolutely epic. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, if we could get them doing that on video, and then use something like company to do reels or shorts.
Absolutely correct, and he's really well, I really want communism. Okay, thanks for admitting it, right? I think that is one of the most effective means that cuts to the core of this, because really, just take a second to absorb this and think about it. Every single it's really just this well-intentioned attempt to help the downtrodden, but when you look at the actual result of it, it's more centralized control. It doesn't help the downtrodden, and it's really just moving the needle towards central control, away from free. to the communist advantage until one day you wake up and you go, where did all my free speech go? Where did
sharing it. Put your like on the button. Really, sorry to take it long. I know you gotta go. But guys, it is nothing if you just share. And repost and make a comment.
Free up time to spend more time working on this platform and to try to get information out that we know the media is not going to cover, right? And so appreciate you, Alan. I am about to start a subscriber-only after space. I'm going to keep it kind of short because there is a chopper. Penny, especially Alan. Alan's a journalist, but if you turn notifications on for my account, whenever I'm hosting these breaking news spaces, you'll be notified. And trust me, that's not content that you want to miss. So really appreciate everybody who spoke today. Make sure you're following everybody up on stage. So we're going to get a peek behind the curtain, give direct feedback, and ask for features that we think are going to be the most beneficial for the platform and for the community at large. These aren't my spaces. These are our spaces.